Last night, I answered a knock at my friend's house. The person standing outside was me. When I think back, I can still smell the candle wax. Brandon's girlfriend, Kate, had a habit of burning 5 different scented candles at once, as if the smell of vanilla, pine, and burnt sugar could mask the fact that her apartment was always too quiet. My girlfriend, Leela, teased her about it as the 4 of us sat around the coffee table, eating instant noodles, half watching a movie, half playing Uno. It should have been a normal evening. I remember thinking how unusually quiet the neighborhood was, the kind of quiet where you could hear the hum of the refrigerator and a faint rustle in the silence between sounds. Brandon's house was at the end of a curve, a 2-story duplex with a narrow porch and a single security light that never stayed on for long. We had just started talking about our weekend plans when there was a knock at the door. 3 distinct knocks, unhurried, unafraid, confident. Brandon frowned, half rising from the sofa. "Is someone else coming over?" "No," I blurted out before I could think. "This isn't my house," but the knock felt like it was meant for me. The knock came again, with the same rhythm, a short pause between each. Kate looked at the door, then at Brandon. Must be a misdelivery. But Brandon didn't move. Neither did I. Something about that rhythm made my stomach clench. "Relax," Leela said, nudging me gently. "I'll go check." Before I could tell her not to, she had crossed the living room and flipped on the porch light. The light flickered once, then shone steadily. I peered through the glass pane next to the door. There was a shadow outside, about my height. Leela opened the door a crack, then froze. Brandon," she said softly. "Come here and look at this." He joined her at the door, confusion evident on his face. Kate leaned over the back of the sofa, but I had already sprung to my feet. I didn't know what I was expecting. Perhaps a prank or a neighbor. As I walked closer to the door, the air seemed to thin. The man standing outside looked exactly like me. The same jacket, the same hairstyle, the same tired dark circles under his eyes. Even the way he held his shoulders, slightly turned as if unsure whether to step forward or back, was my posture. Seeing me, he smiled. "Hey," he said, his voice perfectly calm. "Why'd you change the locks?" For a moment, no one spoke. My mind frantically tried to find a logical explanation. Twin brother, a doppelganger, some kind of prank. Brandon mumbled, "What the hell?" The man outside tilted his head. "You're not gonna let me in? It's freezing out here." I felt my breath catch. "Who are you?" He blinked, seemingly surprised by the question. "Funny, isn't it? You tell me." I slammed the door shut before he could take another step. The sound echoed through the living room. Kate shrieked. Leela grabbed my arm. "What the hell are you doing, Matt? There's someone out there pretending to be you." Brandon twisted the deadbolt. "All right, this is crazy. Maybe he just looks like you." "No," I said. "You saw him. It can't just be looks like." 3 knocks echoed on the porch again, this time slower. Leela whispered, "Is it a prank, like a deep fake or something?" I shook my head. He's wearing my clothes, and he sounds exactly like me. My own parents wouldn't be able to tell the difference. The knocking stopped. Brandon let out a shaky breath. "I'm calling the police." He grabbed his phone and dialed. While he spoke to the operator, the 3 of us stood still, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the quiet house breathing around us. When he hung up, Brandon said, "They're sending a car." We waited 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Leela peeked through the side pane once, but immediately recoiled. "He's still there." I forced myself to look through the glass. My own face stared back at me. It smiled faintly, as if finding something immensely amusing. Then it raised its hand and knocked again, softer, steadier, patiently. "When the police get here," Brandon mumbled. 2 officers arrived. They found nothing. The porch was empty. The night air was as still as it had been from the start. One of them asked if I'd been drinking. I said no. He said they'd patrol the area, told us to lock up tight, and then they left. We tried to force out a laugh, but none of us could. Brandon suggested we all crash there for safety. Around midnight, Kate retreated to the bedroom. Leela curled up beside me on the sofa, feigning sleep. Brandon stayed wide awake, eyes fixed on the dark TV screen. That's when I heard another knock, from the back door. Brandon looked at me as if hoping I'd misheard. Then we both heard it a second time. 3 knocks, slow and rhythmic. We tiptoed into the kitchen. The small window above the sink looked out onto the backyard. The porch light was off, the darkness thick as black velvet. I whispered, "Don't." but Brandon ignored me, flipping the light switch. The bulb buzzed to life, a sickly yellow, casting a strip of light onto the glass door. I was standing out there again, same jacket, same stance, only this time the smile was off, too wide. It raised its hand, pressing its palm against the glass. The shape of the hand matched mine perfectly. Brandon gritted through his teeth. How's he doing that? I wanted to answer, but my mouth was dry. The thing out there leaned closer to the glass, its forehead pressing lightly enough that its breath fogged a patch on the pane. Then it whispered something. We couldn't hear it through the door, but I knew the shape of those words perfectly. Its lips moved. Let me in. Brandon ripped down the blinds. All right, that's enough, I'm calling again. But before he could reach for his phone, the kitchen light flickered and died. Not just off, but as if it hesitated. The refrigerator's hum ceased, the oven clock disappeared, and the air seemed to thicken. I heard Brandon's shallow, ragged breathing beside me, then something lightly scraped along the outside of the glass door. We backed into the hallway. Leela appeared, rubbing her eyes. What's going on? I was about to answer when I saw a shadow flit across the window curtain. A shadow of myself, brushing against the fabric, the blurred outline of a face pressed close enough to make the curtain quiver slightly, then it vanished. The breaker, Brandon whispered. He headed towards the staircase. Kate called out from the bedroom, her voice tiny, asking if everything was okay. No one answered. I didn't want to step into that dark staircase, but standing still was even more terrifying. I followed Brandon down, the flashlight on his phone casting narrow streaks of light on the rough brick wall. The switch was in the on position. See, he said, the power's fine. Then there was a loud bang upstairs, strong enough to make dust fall from the ceiling. We rushed up 2 steps at a time. The back door was wide open, cold air pouring into the kitchen like water. The curtain flapped wildly against the wall. Kate stood frozen in the hallway, hand covering her mouth. It's inside, she whispered. I saw the wet footprints on the tiled floor before I saw it. I was standing in the living room doorway, head tilted slightly, eyes vacant. It looked like it had just forgotten how to breathe. Brandon snatched a table lamp from the shelf, holding it like a weapon. Stay still, he said, his voice breaking. The thing slowly turned its head towards him like a rusty hinge, then smiled. This time not wide, but sad. Leela called my name. I didn't know which one of us she was calling. In a heartbeat, everyone froze. Then it lunged, incredibly fast. It knocked the lamp flying, sending it crashing. Brandon screamed. Kate shrieked. Leela pulled my arm and we stumbled back into the hallway. All I remember was a violent crash, the sound of glass breaking, Brandon's voice cut short. He grunted, then fell. When everything stopped, the silence was worse than the noise. The electricity flickered back on, the light bulbs buzzing softly overhead. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and sweat. I was standing in the middle of the living room, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Someone was lying on the floor right at my feet, motionless. He looked exactly like me. The police arrived after Kate called. I don't clearly remember the sirens, only the questions. Where did the intruder come from? Why did he look like me? What happened to Brandon? I kept repeating, I don't know. A police officer pulled me aside, asking again, slower. As if he thought if he spoke more gently, I'd be less inclined to lie. He pointed to the body covered with a white sheet. You want me to believe you don't recognize him? I looked at the hand sticking out from under the sheet, the scar across the knuckle, the small mole next to the wrist. I recognize him, I said. I just don't know which one of us he is. They didn't like that answer. They kept me isolated for hours. The detective taking my statement said the neighbors only saw one person through the window, the one who broke the glass. But when they showed me a photo taken at the scene, something about the angle felt wrong. The face on the floor looked peaceful, almost relieved. When they finally allowed us to talk, Leela wouldn't look at me. She only said they saw you standing over him. Standing over who? I asked. Her voice broke. Over you. That was 2 days ago. Now I'm at home, waiting to see if I'll be charged with anything. They said the fingerprints on the body match mine. Dental records too, blood type 2. I try to recall every second of that night, but the details keep slipping away. Sometimes I remember hitting him, sometimes he hit me. Sometimes I was the one running, sometimes I was the one who stayed. Every time I look in the mirror, my reflection is half a beat slower than me. Not enough for others to notice, but enough for me to feel it. At night, I keep hearing a strange sound, like a faint, steady knocking somewhere in my mind. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Leela doesn't answer when I call. Kate says she's having trouble sleeping, that she's afraid of me. I don't blame her. I find myself using words I don't remember choosing, standing aimlessly in a room without remembering why I walked in. This morning, I found something in my jacket pocket that wasn't mine. A house key attached to a green tag, exactly like the one Brandon used. I don't know how it got there. The police said the man they found, the other asterisk me, also had the same key in his pocket. I keep thinking about what he said through the glass. Let me in. Maybe that's exactly what he was doing. Maybe one of us let the other in. I no longer know which side of the door I'm standing on. The flight attendant asked us to lower the window shades. They insisted it was mandatory. They were panicked, whispering about some upcoming turbulence. My flight began about 9 hours ago. I left New York for Singapore, a roughly 19-hour flight. I had sleeping pills and chewing gum ready to deal with the terrible ear and jaw pain. My sinuses always act up with pressure changes, so I dreaded this flight, especially flying alone for a conference. I vaguely heard the flight attendant's instructions, pointing to oxygen masks, emergency exits, first aid kits, and so on. They mentioned Wi-Fi and the menu. The flight attendant nearest me was a young woman with her hair in a high bun and bubblegum pink lipstick. Her face held a strained seriousness. Though her mouth tried to pull into a smile, her eyes didn't. After the usual procedures, there were a few additional remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please note that we will be flying at a very high altitude, and pressure changes may affect your body. If you experience extreme discomfort or severe headaches, please do not hesitate to inform the crew. We may encounter turbulence at a certain point. And should an emergency arise, please listen to the instructions of the crew and captain and follow policy. I didn't pay much attention to what they said. I doubted the crew could help with my sinuses feeling like needles piercing my brain. As soon as the plane took off, I swallowed a sleeping pill and drifted off. I put on my headphones and pulled down my sleep mask, becoming almost completely isolated from the rest of the plane. I remember having feverish dreams, full of twisted, twitching shapes, larger than they should be, swelling to fill space, stretching my mind. I remember the feeling of being crushed by heavy, hot, itching masses of shapes. That uncomfortable fuzziness was quickly ripped apart by a sharp, exploding pain directly in my jaw. The pain was so intense it cut through the divine effects of the sleeping pill, jolting me awake, eyes wide open in the darkness of the mask, sweating and nauseous. I ripped off the mask but couldn't focus my eyes on anything as the pain exploded like fireworks in my jaw, between my eyes, and right between my throat and ear canals. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I couldn't even cry or speak. I was just too stunned, too overwhelmed. I braced myself, enduring for what felt like hours or minutes, just praying for it to end. It felt like hammers pounding my eye sockets and temples and screwdrivers being shoved into my gums and nostrils. I felt my stomach rise into my throat, then suddenly, a terrible, constricting spasm tightened around my neck and chest. My pain ended so abruptly that I could still feel its lingering traces, like looking directly at the sun and seeing spots dance before your eyes for a few minutes. I sat there, frozen, numbly processing what had happened while silently cursing my stupid sensitivity. Looking across the rows and at other passengers, I saw a few pale, worn-out faces, enough to understand they had just gone through something similar. I was exhausted, just wanting to escape this steel cage. The seat back in front of me was too close, the top of the seat too low, almost hitting my head, the plane window too near, my legs stiff, my back aching. I looked at the clock. Only 3 hours had passed. Damn it. That's enough, I'm going to the bathroom. I touched the arms of the 2 men sitting next to me, asking them to get up. Both groaned and awkwardly moved aside. I stumbled towards the bathroom, so dizzy I felt like kneeling. I'm going to throw up in the toilet. Okay, I give up. I opened the bathroom door but fumbled inside, unsure how to lock it. Whatever, as I said, I'm about to throw up. If someone accidentally opens the door and sees me about to vomit, so be it. I emptied everything in my stomach, then spent another 15 minutes splashing water on my face. I'm detailing this because I assume the flight attendants probably didn't know someone was in the bathroom because the door looked unlocked and no one had come out for a while. Otherwise, they wouldn't have let me overhear the conversation that followed. Or should we just do it now? I don't know. I shouldn't even be on this flight. Calm down. If they panic, everything will be worse. We just need to be extremely, extremely careful. Yes, good. And what if we crash? We won't crash. We've done this many times and nothing has happened. Calm down. I just think we should. Just then, unfortunately, I got nauseous again, letting out a loud, uncontrollable dry heave. They heard it and fell silent. I vomited a little more greenish liquid. I flushed. It sounded like the entire plane was flushing right there in the toilet. That really threw me off. I opened the door and offered an embarrassed smile, squeezing past them to my seat. The two flight attendants looked at me like I'd just walked in on a family party where they were trash-talking me. I returned to my seat, wanting to crawl under the floor, but the suffocating feeling of the chair immediately reminded me. I just wanted to sleep again, so I swallowed another pill and pulled up my mask. Ladies and gentlemen, please close your window shades immediately. This is a mandatory requirement for your safety and the safety of other passengers. I couldn't fall asleep because I felt a hand reaching for me. Hey, what are you doing? Close the shade. The flight attendant is going crazy about this. The kid next to me mumbled, pulling down his shade. All the flight attendants were standing guard in their sections. The one overseeing our area was biting her lip, hands gripping the seat back, knuckles white. Seeing me look, she forced out a twisted smile. In the dim airplane lights, the tension was almost palpable. No one spoke, all the shades were closed. It was dead silent. The small screen on my seat showed we were flying over the North Atlantic, about to enter the polar region. A vast ocean, no land. What exactly were they not showing us? Some military vessel? A military base? I suddenly felt pressure behind my eyes. The nausea returned, a sensation like being hung upside down. I tried to swallow, I popped chewing gum into my mouth. 11 more hours. Damn it. The plane was eerily silent. And if that wasn't enough to scare me, the flight attendants' faces certainly were. Their eyes constantly darted back and forth between the shades, their breathing shallow. They wouldn't be acting like this just for some ridiculous military base. They looked exactly like animals in despair, in danger. Funny, we think we're different from animals, but just having someone stare at us for too long makes us uncomfortable, restless, even if they're looking through walls or through the plane's fuselage. I felt my throat constrict. Hey, why do we have to close the shades? An old woman behind me asked. We are flying through an atmospheric radiation layer. The glare could temporarily blind or disorient you. The answer came out like a recorded message. So what? It's just temporary. Please follow instructions, otherwise you may be fined. The risk of injury is real. That seemed to be enough to shut the woman up. 10 minutes passed, then another 10. I tried to play music but couldn't sleep, and now it felt like my entire skull was vibrating. Maybe it really was vibrating. My chest too. After an hour of uneasy silence, I was sure there was a low hum in my chest and head. Somehow, it felt familiar and extremely low frequency, but very familiar to me. I didn't know what to think. The frequency gradually increased, then the entire plane could hear it. Everyone felt the fuselage vibrating, a different kind of turbulence. What the hell is that? I couldn't identify it, but it sounded both very familiar and very out of place. A young girl suddenly stood up, turning to the flight attendants, her eyes alight with a realization that ignited something within me. When she spoke, her voice had a strange dryness. What is that? Tell me right now. The wind in this area is very strong radiation. Don't lie to me. Don't lie to me. This is my field. How can this be? She lunged to pull open the shade, but the nearest flight attendant pulled her away from her seat with what must have been illegal force. He then pinned her down. What are you doing? What are you doing? I'll sue. Those sounds aren't human. No human could make those sounds, and how could it be human? We're flying thousands of feet in the air. Let me go. I have to look outside. I don't care if I'm temporarily blind. The flight attendants didn't move. They just stared at us, and at this point, I feared them more than I feared what would happen if the shades were opened. An argument, shouting back and forth, then the flight attendant leaned down and whispered something in the girl's ear. She immediately fell silent. Another half-hour passed, and we remained seated, watched like naughty children. The plane lights flickered, then went completely dark for a moment. But as soon as they came back on, a scream tore through the air from one of the flight attendants. This person rushed forward and ripped down a shade. An old man had slightly opened it. I only caught a glimpse of a thin strip of light falling across his face, cold and colorless. "What is that, sir?" He stood up, his lips forming words without sound. Then the muscles in his neck tightened, his jaw began to vibrate as if something was pulling it from inside. I had never seen anyone so pale, trembling, teeth chattering, eyes wide and pupils almost gone. "What the hell? How can this be? I don't understand. I don't understand. I really don't." He repeated, then stood still, his mouth agape in shock. Then he looked up at us and mumbled, "We're all going to die up here." "That's enough, sir. We'll take you to the back of the plane, where you'll sit with." "You can take me to hell, I don't care. You have no power here," he mumbled, his eyes now completely dark, his mouth agape. He left his seat, knelt in the aisle, and let out a desperate wail. No one said anything else. They restrained him. "Now you're in the back." I asked to go to the bathroom and was granted permission. As I passed the shadow of the man sitting there, swaying back and forth, eyes unblinking, I managed to whisper a question, blending into the vibrating frequency that enveloped the plane. He answered through clenched teeth, and his reply confused me all the way back to my seat. My question was, "What did you see?" Another half-hour passed. I glanced back at the old man, only to see him cold, pale, eyes wide open forever. A flight attendant discreetly pulled him into the cabin. All of us were too afraid to speak, but clearly no one dared open the shades again. I write these words with trembling hands, my chest vibrating, the pressure behind my eyes making me want to vomit. I still have many hours of flight over the ocean and clearly feel the unblinking gaze of the flight attendants on me. I feel something approaching. I feel something moving towards us. I'm afraid of experiencing the turbulence they spoke of, and the old man's answer still haunts me. Those were his last words before he left us and lay motionless, eyes wide open. Words spoken with an unsettling clarity. "May I ask, have you ever looked a blue whale directly in the eye?" Seeking husband asterisk. I know this isn't like anyone else. Trust me, I've tried being like everyone else and it never ends well for anyone. I need a kind of open-mindedness that I hope to find here. But more importantly, I need my future husband to understand the rules. Cute meet-cutes in movies are nice, but they don't guarantee that the other person knows how to follow basic instructions. That was my first mistake. So please forgive my directness. I'll state my requirements clearly. Please read carefully. If you can't meet them, there's no need to read further. 1 must want children, at least one. I'm open to more, but one is mandatory. 2 must commit long-term, specifically until our child turns 18. I understand that level of commitment sounds daunting, especially since we haven't even met. After the child is born, you're free to ignore me if you wish or find joy elsewhere. Though I must warn you, it won't be easy, but you will have to live under my roof until our child is an adult. 3 preference for homebodies. This will make the next 2 decades much easier for you. 4 must have impeccable manners. I will give you a detailed guide on the required etiquette. But at least initially, you must have basic politeness. If you often blurt out tactless remarks or don't even bother to say good morning to neighbors on the street, stop reading here. This opportunity is not for you. Seriously. Now I should probably talk about myself, but frankly, this isn't some romantic proposal. I'm asking for your commitment beforehand, without even guaranteeing we'll actually like each other after we meet. If we do, great. That will make the years pass faster. If not, you still have the grand prize, many years of free, all expenses paid accommodation at the Old Oak Inn. A sanctuary that has existed in this very spot, in many forms, since before the ley lines. Throughout its existence, it has been flooded, burned to the ground, and demolished to dust. Time and again, it has been reimagined and rebuilt. Most of the current structure was built in the Victorian era, though the oldest parts date back to the 13th century. Deep in the garden, carved into the surrounding hill, is a cave covered in red ochre handprints. We, the Edwards family, have always had someone in this hotel, though of course, not always with that surname. You'd think a family so tied to a place would keep proper records, but in truth, no one is sure where we began. Perhaps it was a cosmic bargain, or perhaps just luck. Good luck or bad luck, I still haven't decided. Either way, our presence is mandatory. In this patchy history, there have been times when an Edwards family member fled, and each time coincided with a particularly brutal period in history. I took office 5 years ago. On the stroke of midnight on my 18th birthday, my parents picked up their already packed suitcases and left. I don't blame them for leaving me. One day, I intend to do the exact same thing to my child, or hopefully, our child. Sometimes they send postcards and pictures. They're always smiling brightly on sunny beaches. Money is never an issue for them. It's part of some vague pact our ancestors signed. When a caretaker leaves in good standing, according to the rules, they'll never have to worry about scarcity again. They can travel the world for the rest of their lives, sleeping on the softest sheets every night, eating in the finest restaurants with pockets full of money. Please remember this, because if you meet my requirements, you will share in that good fortune. So what do we have to do in return? I can almost hear you shouting that question. The answer is not much. The presence of an Edwards ensures that guests cannot leave the hotel grounds. Most of our guests are long-term residents, though occasionally, a transient visitor drops by. Where they come from, I don't know, because we don't appear to most people who accidentally wander into this secluded corner of the world. I've come to believe the hotel chooses when to reveal itself, when it's lonely or needs more characters. Jimmy, my first husband, was one such guest. Most guests are harmless. Occasionally, they'll give you a start, like sticking their head out of a wall or turning the bathwater into blood. But I can hardly blame them. I've only been here for 23 years, and I'm already bored stiff. I can't imagine how bored to death I'd be if I were stuck here for 500 years. There are a few exceptions you need to know about. Eric, our great uncle, the serial killer. He insisted he was Jack the Ripper when he was alive, but I think he was just boasting. He knows enough not to dare touch an Edwards, but unfortunately, my husband and I are still fair game. Years ago, my grandmother somehow trapped him on the 4th floor, so you'll be perfectly safe from him, as long as you never set foot on that floor. Occasionally, the elevator will stop at the 4th floor on its own, even if you don't press the button. Don't step out, even if you see the elevator seems to be on fire or starting to fill with murky water. Just wait for the door to close and press another floor. At most, it'll be over in a few hours. The thing in the cellar, I don't know what it is. No one ever has. We only know it eats rats and must be fed daily. If I'm ever sick or injured, this task will fall to you. Trap rats in the garden, then stand at the cellar threshold and throw the dead rats down the stairs. Do not go down the stairs, and do not forget to feed it. Trust me, you don't want to be the first to see its face. Mrs. Jones, she's ancient and extremely particular about manners. She's the reason I'm looking for a husband, not a boyfriend. She can't stand the idea of an unmarried couple living together under her roof. Actually, she's a sweet old lady, full of wartime stories, and always ready to help me if I'm stuck on a recipe. I don't blame her at all for Jimmy. I warned him enough. Besides the guests, there are other rules you need to follow to ensure a safe and pleasant stay at the Old Oak Inn. All are written in a book that has been copied many times over the centuries. If you accept this opportunity, I will make you read it until you can recite every page flawlessly. However, some rules are so critical they directly relate to your survival, so I must list them here. 1. Except for the 4th floor, you are free to roam the hotel and garden, but you must never step outside our property. Not until our child is old enough to take on the duty. If I were to do so, the consequences would be chaos, disease, disaster, perhaps even another world war. I doubt you would affect the world to that extent, but it would certainly be a personal catastrophe for you. 2. Never look in the mirror in room 33. I mentioned it before, but it bears repeating. 3. Never be rude to Mrs. Jones. That last rule is what killed Jimmy. She was very fond of him. I think he reminded her of her deceased son because she doted on him like her own. Every morning, she'd have breakfast ready for him before I even opened my eyes, and she gradually got used to trailing after him, showering him with praise every time he oiled a rusty hinge or straightened a crooked picture. At first, Jimmy enjoyed the attention, but by the end of the 2nd month, he started to get tired of Mrs. Jones, tired of me, and tired of the hotel. We find our amenities quite adequate. If you want more than a stroll in the garden, we have a lovely indoor pool that occasionally freezes over but is mostly usable. The library, needless to say, is cramped but has every book you can imagine. You only need to think of a book's title and it will appear on one of the shelves. And now I've dragged this whole place into the 21st century. You'll have all sorts of services, movies, series. For Jimmy, it still wasn't enough. He wanted to go out, eat at restaurants, see movies at the cinema, see faces other than the ones always lingering around here. He started with one drink every evening, which turned into several. And in a short time, the bar became his permanent haunt from dusk till midnight. He wasn't the only one who was bored. When he first appeared, I was ecstatic. When he agreed to stay, I almost fainted. How wonderful it was to touch real flesh after 5 years surrounded only by the dead. What a relief to have someone share the work to keep the hotel running smoothly. The more he drank, the less he wanted to help, even less he wanted to spend time with me. He stopped sleeping in my bed, moving to a room at the other end of the floor. When there was friction, if I was lucky, he'd ignore it. If I was unlucky, he'd nitpick or outright vent his anger at me, blaming me for imprisoning him. Still, I tried to be present whenever he went down to the bar. After all, I was a devoted wife. I insisted on pouring his drinks, secretly diluting them behind his back. When Mrs. Jones started to nag too much, I'd distract her with a game of gin rummy. On his last day, I was late. The ghost on the second floor, usually the gentlest and least demanding, suddenly came down with some strange ailment or simply wanted to annoy me. In short, that morning I woke up to the most sickening smell I'd ever encountered. Following it, I arrived at its room and found every surface covered in a viscous, greenish, filthy, thick substance, somewhere between snot and vomit. I scrubbed all day, only stopping for a few minutes occasionally, stepping outside to catch my breath, feeling faint. By the time the room was somewhat acceptable and I had stuffed large garbage bags full of dirty rags, it was late at night. Knowing I was already late, I quickly washed the grime from my hands and face, then rushed downstairs to the bar. I arrived just in time to hear Jimmy's last words. After he spat in Mrs. Jones' face, she just stared at him for a small eternity, her typical maternal smile still frozen on her lips, as if lovingly scolding him. Then, like melting candle wax, her face began to distort. I screamed for Jimmy to run, but there was no need. Before I could finish the sentence, he had sprung from his bar stool and dashed for the door. Mrs. Jones followed just seconds later. Her lips had already begun to curl back, revealing rows and rows of long, razor-sharp fangs, while claws protruded from beneath the sleeves of her gin rummy cardigan. I ran after them, head down, but Jimmy was fueled by fear. And Mrs. Jones was fueled by whatever it is that has helped every Mrs. Jones in the world chase people down since time immemorial. I followed the screams to the lobby. Breathless, I arrived just in time to see him only a few steps from the front door before Mrs. Jones caught him. Claws tightened around his neck and lifted him into the air. As I watched, her jaw unhinged, the lower part dropping almost to her chest. That sight sent all reason flying from my head, erasing every rule my parents had ever instilled. I lunged at her. She swatted me away like a fly. I crashed into the reception desk, my breath knocked out of my chest in a loud gasp. I was sure I was going to die, for no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pull air back into my aching chest. Finally, as my vision began to darken, I managed to gasp once, then again, and again, until I had enough strength to clumsily stand up. By then, Mrs. Jones had almost finished her dinner. Jimmy's chest was torn open, muscles and broken ribs jutting out in all directions, and she was chewing the last bits of his heart. His head was turned towards me, the light in his eyes extinguished, but they still held his final horror and an accusation I was certain was directed at me. I want to say I only felt horror, but I can't deny a flicker of annoyance. How many times had I told him to mind his manners? Mrs. Jones swallowed with a gurgling sound in her throat, then dropped the rest of Jimmy to the floor. Then she turned to me. "Here's another rule for you, and I hope you never need to use it. Never interfere with a kill." Mrs. Jones, who once kissed my scraped knees, who argued with my mother for the right to read me bedtime stories. Now, she was no longer in control. No amount of pleading or reason could sway her. My only option was to run. Turning, I bolted past the reception desk, towards the office in the back. If Jimmy hadn't been so drunk with fear and alcohol, perhaps he would have remembered the rules and survived. It was one of the staff-only rooms scattered throughout the hotel, enchanted to keep unwanted guests out. Just 10 steps from the counter to the door, yet it was the longest distance of my life. The ragged breaths I'd taken earlier burned my throat, my heart pounded in my ears, drowning out all sounds except Mrs. Jones' thudding footsteps. My hand reached for the doorknob. Her breath, hot and tasting of blood, hit the back of my neck, and fire erupted on my skin as her claws raked down my back. Just one more step away, I might have collapsed. The pain would have been too much to bear. but I still managed to throw myself into the office and slam the door shut before collapsing. Before losing consciousness, I heard her growl and roar outside the door, furious at being unable to enter. I stayed in the office for 3 days, only creeping out to feed the thing in the cellar, then scurrying back. Each time I went out, I tried not to look at the pile of shredded flesh that used to be Jimmy. The smell, there was no escaping it. With difficulty, thanks to a first aid kit, I managed to treat and bandage the claw marks on my back. Throughout the first day, they still seeped blood, but fortunately, they didn't get infected. On the morning of the 4th day, there was a soft knock on the door, then hurried footsteps running away. I waited until I heard them far down the hallway before opening the door a crack. On the floor was a warm Victoria sponge cake and a beautifully handwritten letter of apology. I gathered all my courage. That evening, I forced myself to walk into the dining room. Mrs. Jones was waiting, eyes red-rimmed, a steaming meatloaf on the table. I tried not to flinch when she took my hand, repeating the apology she had written earlier. The next morning, she helped me clean up Jimmy. We were wary of each other for a while, but then we returned to playing gin rummy as before. On days when the scars on my back ached, she helped me apply ointment, and even though I told her it wasn't necessary, she always apologized. So you've heard my story, and this is my offer. If you think you might be the right man, I invite you to visit. You'll have to drink a cup of sheep's blood with a dash of nutmeg to make it easier to swallow, and light a black candle before bed. The next time you wake up, you'll find yourself standing at the hotel gate. Compared to the Orient Express, this mode of transport isn't quite as luxurious, but it's better than buying a plane ticket. If you've read this far without grimacing, if you can endure the journey to get here, if you walk to our door and are brave enough to open it, I have one more instruction for you. As soon as you step inside, look to your right. You'll see a dark brown stain on the lobby carpet. I've scrubbed it countless times, but it refuses to fade. Perhaps that's for the best. It's a very clear reminder of what will happen to you if you call Mrs. Jones a meddling old woman. And when you meet Jimmy, and you will meet him, for in the evenings he still likes to hover around the bar, his silver-white wounds glinting as if freshly torn. Don't let him trick you into believing he's the victim. A stranger joined our paranormal support group. He shouldn't have. I ignored the dead woman standing behind Pete, or I tried to ignore her. I was quite used to not looking at her, but not hearing was another matter. Drip, 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 something dripped from her hand. Blood, or something worse, no way to know without looking. My eyes stung with the temptation to glance. Just one quick look surely wouldn't hurt. I blinked hard and refocused on what Pete was saying. Shirley's not here tonight. Her kids have the flu. I volunteered to help clean the room. I nodded towards the end of the hallway. I'll go first. I went ahead, carefully avoiding looking into windows, polished doorknobs, sudden puddles, anything that might reflect. When I reached the room, I paused, glancing at Pete out of the corner of my eye. Do you want to? He understood the routine. Not yet, not time to enter the room. With deliberate calm, Pete leaned against the wall and stared at the ceiling, while I opened the door and hurried inside. I fumbled, tucking the key into the storage unit, and found what I needed right at hand, thanks to Shirley's organizational skills. Almost running towards the door, I uncapped the container and drew a thick line of salt just inside the threshold. I only caught a fleeting glimpse of a bare foot, swollen, skin as pale as a corpse, mottled with blue. Thick, dark liquid pooled around the rotting toes. Then Pete stepped over the salt line and quickly moved to the storage unit, closing the door with a click, leaving the curtains to me. It wasn't Pete's fault. Expecting him to do this wasn't fair. Even though my rational mind understood this, it didn't stop the irritation from rising as I wrestled with the tangled curtain cords, my jaw clenched, listening. Thump, thump, thump. My mouth was dry. Just to the right, on the other side of the glass, was a black blob, and was that a fingernail? No wonder the cleaning ladies hate us, I muttered before I could stop myself, followed by a cackle that sounded like a scream. A terrible idea, I admitted, but at least it broke the heavy silence in the room, keeping my head clear long enough to win the battle with the curtain. When I finally sealed off the outside world, I allowed myself to pause for a beat, just long enough for my hands to stop shaking. By the time I turned back to the storage unit, I had managed to plaster a smile on my face. Pete had retrieved his talisman. He sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching a worn-out book so tightly his knuckles were white. Hearing the door open, he looked up expectantly. All clear, I confirmed. Must have been a tough week, huh? I bit my tongue, swallowing the question as he awkwardly stood up. Not asking would feel heartless, especially with the dark circles under his eyes even darker than usual. But now wasn't the time. The first and most important rule made that clear. We pulled out chairs in silence and arranged them in a circle in the middle of the room. Pete took out 5 large white candles, one for each person, placing them next to each chair. While I pulled out the box of talismans, at the bottom was a jumble of metal medals, symbols of a dozen different religions. Remnants from the early days when Shirley and I stumbled around in the dark. In the end, none of the current regular members were particularly religious. Not even Stephen, our retired priest. We all preferred more personal things: a worn-out, almost ragged teddy bear, a nearly full bottle of whiskey, a rubber dog bone with the teeth marks of its former owner still visible. I dug out my item, a keychain with a picture of a seaside town, and put it in my pocket. The cat scratching post was too bulky for one person to carry, so we had to drag it into position together, then separated to finish the rest of the tasks. Pete searched the entire room, opening every cabinet, then knelt and crawled under the tables. We weren't the only ones using this room. A forgotten mirror from the anxiety knitting group would be enough to cause a disaster. While he went around, I laid out the rule cards. By now, I knew them by heart, but I still reviewed them, as Shirley always said. A few minutes reviewing the rules can save us a lifetime of trouble. 1. Do not begin sharing until all protective measures are in place. 2. Any member with an attached entity may not enter the room until the salt line has been laid. 3. Cover all reflective surfaces. 4. Once the candles are lit, no one may leave the room until they burn out. 5. Don't be a jerk. Everyone's story is valuable, even if it doesn't match your experience. 6. Listen when others are speaking. You'll have your turn. Daphne floated in just as we finished, wearing her favorite fluffy pink sweater and carrying a giant box of cookies. She glanced at Pete, then shoved the box into his hands. "You look too thin, eat," she ordered. She gave me a quick hug before reaching into the talisman box, grabbing her teddy bear, clutching it to her chest, then flopping down onto a chair. Mary entered next, her face drawn, a clearly visible black eye. A gasp escaped me. "Oh, poor thing, what happened?" She suddenly stopped, quickly clapped a hand over her mouth, and looked around at us with frightened eyes. "Don't worry, Mary," I reassured her. "The hand that hit my face was human, not asterisk it." "Who was stupid enough to hit you?" I widened my eyes. Though short, when she wasn't managing the pub, she helped her brother on the farm. Between carrying beer kegs and bales of hay, her arms were almost iron. "Drunk customer." She pulled her dog toy out of the box, squeezing it tightly in her hand. The toy hadn't squeaked in a long time, only let out a sad puff of air. "He's not allowed in the pub anymore, just not allowed in." I raised an eyebrow. The corner of her lip was probably a bit bruised too. Stephen arrived last, a few minutes late. Sorry, he panted, struggling to carry a howling cat carrier through the door. He absolutely refused to cooperate. He put the cage down with a thud, opened the door, then scurried away. Ed stepped out, tail twitching irritably. He gave Stephen a sour look with his piercing green eyes. Stephen quickly raised his hands in surrender. "Don't be grumpy, Ed," Daphne cooed. "Poor Stephen had to work so hard to carry you here." Around the circle, hands delved into pockets. They pulled out cheese bits, cat treats, handfuls of leftover chicken. Ed accepted each offering like a king receiving tribute from his subjects. He gradually softened, letting us pet him for a while before leaping onto the scratching post, meticulously licking his glossy black fur, which had just been touched by dirty human hands. Then I looked around the group. "I guess that's everyone, right? Shall we begin?" My stomach churned with that familiar feeling, half eager, half afraid. I knew they felt the same, but everyone silently moved to their places. Stephen conveniently reached for the whiskey bottle. "All right, everyone," I said, trying to ignore the wrongness of sitting in Shirley's usual spot. No matter how many times I filled in for her, I never got used to it. "If anyone needs to use the bathroom, get tea or water, now's the time. Once we light the candles, no one gets up until they burn out." No one moved. Of course, they were too keen and already prepared. "Pete, you do the honors." He pulled a lighter from his jacket, lit his candle, then passed it to Mary. The flame made a full circle. "Until it reaches my hand," I said, lighting my own candle. "In this circle we are safe. Not just safe from the things that haunt us, but safe from each other. Remember, no judgment here. Listen, be kind to each other. Who wants to start? I glanced at Pete, but he subtly shook his head, lips pressed tight, not ready. Okay, I turned to Stephen. He cleared his throat. I'll go, he said, turning the whiskey bottle in his hands. Daniel emailed me a few days ago. Daniel, Alfie's mom, Daphne asked softly. Yes, her. She contacts me around this time every year, updates me on how he's doing. He loves history the most, probably studying history in college in a few years. He remembers you, Mary said. You gave him a chance. Pete, still fiddling with the edge of his book, added, You gave many people a chance. Stephen nodded. It's good to hear, a life he shouldn't have had if. He looked down at the bottle, clutching its neck tightly. But it also reminds me that I'm not myself anymore, and I'll never be the same. His candle flickered, and for a moment the shadow behind him no longer looked like him. It loomed on the wall, fingers elongated and sharp, and the air around us thickened. Breathing was no longer an automatic reflex. We had to struggle, had to remember each breath. Ed on the scratching post let out a low growl. I glanced at each person in turn. Mary stared straight at Stephen, her jaw rigid. Daphne hugged her teddy bear tightly to her chest, the dark circles under Pete's eyes so dark they were almost bruised. I twisted my body back slightly, very slowly, trying to appear as if there was nothing to see, to look at Ed. He was staring at the wall behind Stephen, his tail thumping back and forth. Stephen's voice was hoarse. We should move on to someone else. Good idea, I said, gathering all my strength to keep my voice light. Sounds like you need a lozenge. Mary snorted a laugh. Daphne looked at her as if to say, Are you crazy? Then also let out a tiny laugh. Pete managed a small smile. The compressed feeling vanished as quickly as it came. Ed nonchalantly licked his paw. My turn, Mary said, tapping the rubber bone against her knee. That damned kid was terrible this week. Before we could find out exactly what the brat had done, the door burst open. A young man with glasses poked his head in from the hallway, smiling. Is this the smoking cessation group? They meet here tomorrow. No, I replied. We're a different group. Oh, he sighed, disappointed. I'm assigned to lead that group, so back tomorrow at 8 a.m., I guess you'll do fine. Can I sit in on your session? He asked. I've never led this kind of group before, need to learn a bit. No, Mary snapped. We're a private group, I explained. You won't even notice me, I promise. He stepped fully into the room, and we all frantically scrambled, trying to shoo him out. You can't, this group is closed, you don't understand. Mary's face turned so red it was almost purple. She looked like she was seriously considering hitting him with the rubber bone. She couldn't. None of us could leave the circle. All we could do was helplessly watch him ignore us, pull up an extra chair, and squeeze it into the small gap between Daphne and Stephen. The entire group stared at him in stunned silence, then as if on cue, all turned to look at me. Damn it, Shirley, why did you have to raise such weaklings? Then I looked at the stranger, waiting for him to introduce himself. Martin, he said. You're already here, Martin. For better or worse, our group has very strict rules, and we expect you to follow them. I swallowed the words. You already barged in, that's disrespectful, and only said, most importantly, you must stay seated here for the entire session. No getting up to use the bathroom or go for a smoke. Oh, no worries about that, he smiled brightly. I forced a strained smile in return. Secondly, everyone here respects each other. You may hear things you find very strange. It's not your place to interrupt or deny anyone's experience. I understand how important respect is, he said sincerely, then added with a slight, subtle arrogance, I am a trained counselor after all. Is the ink on your diploma even dry yet? Mary snarled. Mary, I gently reminded her. Not quite a warning, more a plea. She glared at Martin as if to meet him in the parking lot after the session, but said nothing more. How about I go first? Daphne asked. I felt a warm surge of affection for her. Her hand fiddled with the bear's ear. She was clearly uncomfortable but trying her best. That would be wonderful, Daphne. She took a deep breath to compose herself. It's been so unpleasant since it started getting dark earlier. Winter is always the worst. Everyone knows I have many berries at home. She lifted the bear by its front paws, making it do a little dance on her lap. The kids help a bit, but when I woke up and saw it standing at the foot of the bed, she shivered, and when she continued, her voice was no more than a whisper. Those eyes were sewn shut, yet it was still staring. "Are you all suffering from sleep disorders?" Martin interjected. "No," I replied, "and please don't interrupt. Sorry, Daphne, please continue." "People often tell stories like this," she struggled to continue. "They see terrifying things at night, blink, and they're gone. Everyone knows it's not like that for me. Once it appears, it's there until sunrise, following me all over the house, always watching. It was better when Graham was alive. He used to stay up with me, watching movies, holding my hand on the sofa." Her eyes welled up. "Only at first. Later, I saw Mary's hand clench the bone. I understood that feeling. Reason told me not to blame Graham. To live with these things, when not obligated to, requires a special kind of person, and as we've learned, those people are rare. But I still hated him for leaving his wife to suffer alone." Stephen leaned over, offering Daphne a tissue. She smiled gratefully, dabbing at the corners of her eyes. "Creative writing," Martin blurted out. "What?" I asked. "Are you guys a creative writing group?" "Dude, they just told you to shut up," Mary snapped, pointing the bone at him. "She's right," I said. "Please don't make me tell you again." I looked at Daphne. She subtly shook her head, holding the tissue to her cheek. I raised an eyebrow at Mary. "All right," she sighed, turning to me. "As I was saying before I was interrupted," she glared at Martin, "it was really bad this week. Worse than usual. Did it get into the toilet again?" I asked. "Yes, literally, that's why I got this." She touched the bruise around her eye. "Drunk customer got into the stall. That jerk poked his head up from the toilet. Of course, no one expects to see an old man in a bowler hat in the toilet. He panicked and ran out, screaming and flailing his arms." She snorted in disgust. "2 employees quit that night. It's starting to be a problem. It's not hard to hire people. They hear the pub is haunted, they think it'll be fun, a little scare, but as soon as it causes them trouble." "Wait," Martin cut in again. Mary let out a heavy sigh. "Again, you're saying you, I don't know, encountered some real supernatural phenomenon." Mary answered with a sharp look. He turned to Daphne. "You too." She gave a tiny nod, just enough to confirm. "Martin," I interrupted him before he could say more, "I made the rules very clear. We don't deny anyone's experience, but you should." He managed to stop himself, raising his hands in a gesture of remorse. "You're right, your group, your rules, please continue." Mary's frown made it clear she had no intention of continuing. Pete and Daphne both deliberately avoided my gaze, only Stephen looked at me. He cleared his throat, then gently suggested, "Perhaps it's your turn." "I don't want to," especially with Martin leaning forward, eyes fixed on me with a disgustingly sweet interest. But I also couldn't expect others to open up if I avoided it myself. "Okay," I shifted, clutching the keychain in my hand. "Everyone knows how it started." "Martin doesn't," Stephen said. "If I wasn't certain he meant no harm, I would have punched him." We had agreed to keep things within this small group, but he still had a bit of that evangelist blood in him. The only difference was that now it focused on warning everyone about the dangers we had to live with, even if people called him crazy. "If you don't mind." "Not at all." It was hard to say it without gritting my teeth, but that was the best I could do. When I was a kid, my family used to go to the beach every summer. I forced my hand open, holding up the keychain. "This exact spot." Martin narrowed his eyes at the keychain, smiling so quickly it looked fake. "It looks nice. Actually, it's a bit run down." The smell of deep-fried potatoes from years past flooded back through my memory. I remembered the sky always being gray, even in summer, and the cutting cold of the seawater around my calves. I remembered the smell of the damp, moldy carpet in the arcade pressing against my cheek as I dozed off. Then my father's hands would wrap around me, lifting me to his chest. Behind him, Mom and Bea would be arguing about a dress or about her headphones being glued to her ears 24/7 or whatever teenage rebellion made my mother furious. I chuckled, but there was a joy to it. The arcade, the fish and chips by the sea. We went every year until my father died. That year, he passed away, and my mother couldn't bear to go back. The next year, she took us somewhere else. A cramped wooden house in the middle of nowhere. "Must have been difficult," Martin murmured, "changing habits after a near miss." "Mary," I hissed softly. I ignored her and continued. "There was nothing to do there if you didn't like looking at trees or playing incomplete board games. Mom slept a lot, leaving me with Bea. My older sister found her own ways to pass the time. B, at the time, was in what my mother called her difficult phase. Frankly, she was horrible. Their arguments would last for hours, always ending with B slamming her bedroom door, making the trinkets on my shelf rattle. They were always at each other's throats. She had even started talking back to Dad before he passed. But with me, she always made time. I was 11 on that last vacation. B was 16. My friends' older siblings avoided us like the plague, too old, too cool to hang out with kids, but B wasn't like that. She still helped me with my homework and threatened to beat up anyone who dared to bully me. I idolized her a bit, so when she said she knew how to see Dad again and needed my help, I said yes. That night, we went to bed, waiting until we heard Mom snoring. A mix of excitement and cold dread washed over me, as strong as the night I huddled under my blanket, waiting for the creak of her bedroom door and B's whispered call. I followed her into the woods. And then, the memory of that night was like a photo album someone had pulled apart and shredded. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my knuckles into my eyelids, trying to remember. B had brought an old, thick book. I don't know where she got it, she probably stole it. It wasn't in English, I remember clearly because she read several lines from it aloud. I extended my left index finger, looking at the small white scar running along it. B's hand gently held mine. "Sorry, kid," she whispered as she raised the knife. "I just need a few drops." She took my blood. Fire danced behind my eyelids as she dripped it into the fire. When she called, something answered. Red eyes pierced through the darkness. A low growl that vibrated my bones, but it wasn't Dad. She screamed at me to run. I remembered branches whipping my face, my chest feeling like it would explode as my lungs couldn't draw enough air. I ran. I didn't realize I was crying until someone pressed a tissue into my hand. I took it without looking up. Meeting anyone's gaze right now was too much for me. The guilt was too heavy. "You did the right thing," Mary said. "If you hadn't listened to your sister, it would have gotten you too." "Gotten?" Martin asked. Daphne saved me from having to answer. B disappeared that night. My mother, they called the police. They searched the entire forest, found nothing. "You think someone kidnapped her?" Martin asked. "Something got her," Mary said, her voice allowing no argument. Martin, either not understanding the warning or deliberately ignoring it, continued. "No offense to your sister, but it sounds like she was going through a lot. Arguing with her mom, grieving for her dad. Maybe she just ran away." "It seems you're misunderstanding something," Stephen interjected. "Specifically, you think this was a one-time incident. Not all of us have seen that monster." For the 1,000th time, I silently thanked my friend. The first time it came back was exactly 1 year later, the night B took me into the woods. I was alone. I lay stiff in bed as its red eyes glowed through the darkness, trembling each time it growled. Looking it directly in the eyes almost drove me insane. But I didn't dare look away, barely dared to blink. I was certain if I looked away, it would pounce. For the next few anniversary years, I slept in my mother's bed, clinging to her hand as she slept soundly from medication. When I moved out, I spent those nights in a shelter. Finally, I found a group of friends who would sit vigil with me. Martin was about to stand up when he was met with a chorus of "no" from all directions. He turned pale and sank back down. Instead, he sought my eyes, a look of profound pity. "I truly am sorry for what happened, losing your father then your sister at such a young age, but..." He hesitated, fidgeting with his cuff, then seemed to make a decision. "Monsters like the one you're describing aren't real. You know that, right?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Then how do you explain it?" "Grief, trauma, they can make people see very strange things." "And what about all of us seeing it?" Stephen asked. Martin turned to face him. "Mass hallucination is a documented phenomenon, especially in close-knit groups that share a belief system." Mary snorted, opening her mouth to retort, but thump, thump, thump. We all froze except Martin. I vaguely felt him still rambling, building momentum. But all my attention was focused on the knocking on the other side of the window. I knew not to look, but I couldn't help but listen. The other group members' faces were pale. Pete's face had no color left but the pallor of death. On the other side of the room, Ed's deep growl grew louder and louder. "What do we do now? Shirley would know, damn it." I looked at each face, seeing my own panic reflected in them. "Stephen saved us. Young man, I understand you've just heard things that contradict your worldview. His voice trembled, but he spoke clearly. I understand, but that doesn't excuse your rudeness. We only ask for respect, and you haven't shown it. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, Martin said, placing a hand on his chest, feigning sincerity. But there's no such thing as ghosts or things that knock at night. Those beliefs are pathological. Ed began to growl properly now, a low, menacing rumble filling the silence in the room. Mary opened her lips, but Stephen held up a finger, signaling silence. It's true that in some cases, he said, not all and certainly not us. There are medications to help you. And therapy, Martin insisted. This group is *our therapy, Stephen said coldly. No, this is a mass delusion. It's only making you worse. You need to. Thump, Martin whirled his head towards the window, pulling the curtain. Hear that? Nothing. No, Stephen replied, but we've heard enough from you. Thump, again, you must hear that right. We don't know what you're talking about, I said. Your cat knows, he pointed at Ed, who was now standing on all fours, claws dug deep into the fabric, eyes locked on the window. That sound is coming from there. Don't, we all shouted in unison as he started to stand up again. He dropped back down with a thud, looking from one person to another. He gradually understood. You guys think it's some kind of monster, right? Silence, only the knocking. I'll go over there. Please don't, Daphne whispered. And show you there's nothing to be afraid of. If it's true what he said, you're risking your life, Mary said. Martin stood up. Stephen flinched as if to lunge after him. He managed to restrain himself, gripping the chair to keep himself in the circle. Martin, his voice was now low and urgent, I've been involved in dozens of exorcisms. I've seen things that stretched my beliefs to breaking point. Everything I've seen, every experience I've had, tells me one thing: if you go over there, you will die. Why risk it? Mary asked. If there's even a tiny chance he's right, you're gambling your life. Martin looked at her with a gentle, pitying gaze. If I humor your delusion, I'll only make you worse. He stepped out of the circle. With each step he took, we pleaded, begged him to return and sit safely within the circle. As he reached the window, reaching to pull the curtain, Pete gripped my wrist, shaking his head. I nodded. Too late, I whispered. And while the others were still trying to yell at Martin, I had to scream, too late, don't look. I grabbed Pete's hand on one side and Stephen's hand on the other. A moment of hesitation, their expressions moving from denial to anger, then finally helplessness before the others joined hands. Why did it come to this, Mary? We lowered our eyes to the floor. Now only Ed's howling, and beneath it, the distinct click of the window opening. Hello, Martin called out. See, there's nothing here, must be a branch. Ow, Pete's fingernails dug deeper into my skin. Are you okay? Martin's voice trembled slightly for the first time. You look. I think he realized his mistake at the very end. There was a clatter as if he tried to pull back, slam the window shut, but got tangled in the curtain cord. I think he tried to scream, but there was only a sharp intake of breath, a muffled groan, then a heavy thudding sound like feet flailing on the ground, unable to find purchase. Then silence, except for Ed's howl, which softened to a steady, low growl full of warning. And we, the survivors of another deadly night, could only sit in the circle, trapped there until the candles burned out. I didn't dare lift my head, but I heard Daphne whisper and Pete mumble something unintelligible under his breath. Finally, the candles dwindled, the last flame extinguished. Pete sprang up, running towards the storage unit as fast as his trembling legs would allow. Daphne followed, clutching her stomach. When she turned to close the door, I saw her cheeks were wet. Sorry, she mumbled. I can't take it anymore. Mary, Stephen, and I remained to deal with the aftermath. Mary's fingers had punctured the bone. Stephen looked like it had been a very long time since he had to exert himself so intensely to keep from opening the whiskey bottle. But when I looked into their eyes, I saw they had made their decision. On 3, I suggested. When they nodded, I reminded them, don't look out the window. I counted. All 3 of us looked up. Martin lay slumped half out the window. Something stood behind him, looking at us from outside. Our eyes, trained over years, unanimously refused to identify it. If I can close the window, you 2 pull. My lips refused to say the word body, but they understood. All right, boss, Mary replied. They went first, Mary leading with a grim expression, each gripping one of Martin's legs and pulling hard. He slid from the window frame, falling to the floor with a chilling thud. As soon as he was clear, I lunged forward. For a terrifying moment, my hands refused to move. I stood there, frozen, trapped by the fear that when I reached out, a cold hand would grasp my wrist. "They've done their part," I told myself. "Now it's your turn." As my hand touched the doorknob, I saw the woman standing outside, motionless, silent, just a few feet away. I kept my eyes open, not letting her know I had seen her. Besides my pounding heart, the whole room must have heard it. I slammed the window shut, then pulled the curtain to conceal her horrifying silhouette. Only then did I allow myself to take a deep breath, turning to face the next problem. The only signs of injury were the streaks of blood oozing from Martin's hands, staining his sweater shoulder red, and his eyes, wide and vacant, frozen in horror. The last thing he saw in his life. "What do we do with him now?" Mary asked, her voice dry. "Call the police." "And what do we tell them?" I countered. "I don't know," she shrugged. "We could say he collapsed." "Then how do we explain waiting for hours before calling for help?" I hugged myself, trembling. "They'll start digging into what we do here, and after that, we'll be thrown into some hospital," Mary finished, in the most optimistic scenario. "Let me handle it," Stephen mumbled. He was staring at Martin's body, his face pale and covered in sweat. "That's dangerous," Mary warned. "I can do it," he snapped, wiping his mouth with a trembling hand. "I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think I could." I hesitated. "Do you want us to stay with you, or?" "I'd prefer privacy." On the scratching post, Ed was finally silent, but he turned his lamp-green eyes towards Stephen, his tail twitching. As I led Mary towards the storage unit, Stephen called out, his voice hoarse, "Draw a salt line for protection." We crawled into the space where Daphne and Pete were waiting. Her hand was still gripping his shoulder tightly. They looked up, read our grim expressions, then quickly looked away. When I turned to close the door, I caught a glimpse of Stephen. His jaw suddenly unhinged, dropping to his chest, teeth sharp as fangs. He lunged towards Martin, his clawed hands grabbing. I slammed the door shut and reached for the salt container. I am a wildlife photographer. It's a profession that thrives on patience, silence, and the ability to make oneself an invisible, unremarkable part of the landscape. I've spent weeks on end, completely alone, in remote corners of national parks, where my only companions were the whispered wind and the patient click of my camera shutter. I've sat for 14 hours straight in a cramped camouflage blind, not moving, just for 3 seconds of a shy pine mart showing its face. I thrived in that solitude. I loved the profound quiet of the wilderness. I always thought it was where I was most myself. At least, it used to be. Now, silence is what scares me most because it's never truly silent. And solitude is a lie because I am never, not for a single second, truly alone. It all started 3 months ago. I was working on a long-term project in a vast, sparsely populated national forest. It was the kind of place that felt ancient, filled with towering Douglas firs that reached up like cathedral spires, their tops lost in a perpetual mist. My goal was to capture a series of photos of the elusive Cascade red fox, a beautiful but notoriously shy creature. The first few weeks went as usual. I'd wake before dawn, hike miles deep into the wilderness, then sit and waiting for the forest to reveal its secrets. One afternoon, I got the shot I'd been dreaming of, a magnificent male fox. Its fur, red like dying embers, paused in a sun-dappled clearing, its head tilted slightly as if listening. The light was perfect, the composition superb. I snapped a dozen shots, my heart thrumming with that electrifying excitement only photographers understand. That night back at camp, I eagerly uploaded the photos to my laptop. I scrolled through each one, and there it was the money shot. The fox was sharp, its eyes keen and intelligent. The background was a beautifully blurred green and yellow canvas. Everything was perfect, except for a hazy streak. In the upper right corner of the frame, there was a strange, vertical white blur. It was out of focus, just a minor flaw, but incredibly annoying. It looked like a lens flare, but the sun was behind me, so it made no sense. I checked the other shots. It was there in all of them, in the exact same position in every single frame. A ghostly, open incision on an almost perfect photograph. I sighed, blaming it on some peculiar internal reflection in the lens, and reminded myself to clean my equipment thoroughly. A week later, I photographed a herd of elk by the river at dawn. Another perfect morning, mist rising from the water, the massive animals silhouetted against the nascent light. A pristine, breathtaking sight. I took hundreds of shots, and when I reviewed them, the blur was still there. Different setting, different time, different lens, but still the vertical white blur, out of focus, always at the upper edge of the frame. By this point, I wasn't just annoyed, I was obsessed. It had to be a technical glitch, something to be resolved. Was the camera sensor scratched? Was the shutter damaged? I spent 2 full days checking, running every kind of test, shooting empty surfaces. Nothing. By all metrics, my equipment was flawless. The only way was to recreate the circumstances. I returned to the same clearing where I'd photographed the fox, set up my tripod in the exact same spot. At the same time of day, framed the shot identically. Then I sat and waited. The goal was to see the bright streak appear in the viewfinder before I pressed the shutter. I sat there for hours, still as a stone, eyes glued to the viewfinder. Sunlight danced on the grass, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The forest was quiet, but as evening approached, a new sensation began to creep in. A subtle, primal anxiety, the feeling of being watched. It's a feeling all creatures in nature know. Your neck prickles, a cold, clear awareness that you are no longer just an observer, you are also being observed. I slowly, carefully scanned the tree line, looking for the glint of an eye, the slight twitch of an ear. Nothing, but the feeling grew stronger and stronger. It came from the side, right at the edge of my vision. I kept my head perfectly still, my breathing slow and steady, but my eyes darted to the right, and I saw it for just a fraction of a second. It was a tall, shimmering shape, like a column of heat haze, the form of a tall, thin person hanging upside down from a fir branch. Its body was blurry, undulating as if vibrating in the air. The instant my brain registered that impossible image, I snapped my head around to look directly, and there was nothing there, just the bare branch silhouetted against the sky. The forest was still quiet, the feeling of being watched gone. I sat there, my heart pounding as if trying to break free from my chest, my mouth dry. I told myself I was too tired. Solitude was starting to erode my mind. I'd mistaken a trick of the light, my sleep-deprived imagination was fabricating things. I packed up my gear, uneasy, then made my way back to the pickup truck. I needed a break. I needed to see other people. I drove to the nearest ranger station, a small, old wooden cabin that doubled as the forest management headquarters. 2 rangers were on duty that day, an old, grizzled man with a kind but tired face and a younger woman. I made small talk, bought a new map I didn't really need, then tried to act normal as I asked the question I wanted to ask. "Hey, this might sound a bit strange," I began, "but do you guys ever encounter anything odd deep in the woods? I mean, like light hallucinations." The old ranger looked up from his paperwork. He glanced at the younger ranger. They exchanged a very quick look, full of unspoken meaning. "What kind of light hallucinations?" he asked in a low, calm voice. I felt like an idiot but continued, like a tall, shimmering, blurry shape. A person hanging upside down from a tree that you only see out of the corner of your eye. The friendly face of the younger ranger tightened slightly, while the old man just let out a long, tired sigh and leaned back in his chair. "The inverted man," he said, not as a question but a statement. "Yes, we've seen it. Anyone who's been in this area long enough has." A cold wave of relief washed over me, immediately followed by an even thicker layer of dread. I wasn't crazy, but that also meant it was real. "What is it?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't know," he shook his head. "And don't want to know, it's just part of the landscape, I guess. A strange local phenomenon, like a strange magnetic field or an unusual fog. But what does it do?" "Nothing," he said, then leaned towards me, his gaze serious like a father teaching his child. "It does absolutely nothing as long as you do nothing too. That's the only rule, and it's rule number 1. You see it out of the corner of your eye, you keep looking straight ahead. You feel it watching you, you pretend you don't. You do not acknowledge it, you do not interact with it. And absolutely do not actively go looking for it. It's something you should only glimpse by accident. Once you start deliberately looking, that's when trouble begins." "Trouble?" I asked. "What kind of trouble?" "Don't know," the younger ranger interjected, her voice tense. "No one's been stupid enough to find out. It's just something everyone who works here understands implicitly. A sort of professional ritual among those who work in the forest. You leave it alone, it'll leave you alone." I left the ranger station with my head spinning. Their warning was clear and absolute, but they also gave me something else, confirmation and a name, the inverted man, and the blur in my photos it was a vertical bright shape. A shape like a person hanging, it was it. My camera could see it even when my eyes couldn't, and that's where I made my mistake. A fatal, arrogant mistake. I am a photographer. My entire life, my entire purpose is to see and record. To tell me that there is something out there, an observable phenomenon, and I must ignore it, it felt nothing short of an insult. It was an irresistible challenge. The ranger's warning to me felt like an invitation. I returned to the forest. But this time, my quarry was it. I changed my entire approach. I found a spot and waited, not for an animal to appear, but for that familiar prickling sensation to spread across my skin. The moment I felt it, I didn't turn my head. My eyes remained locked forward. But I raised my camera, pointing the lens not at what I was looking at, but at the edge of the frame, into the empty space where I felt it. Then I pressed the shutter. The first shot sent chills down my spine. The vertical blur began to grow larger. It was a bright, blazing white streak, sharp and clear. It looked like a cut across the fabric of the photograph, a ragged slit through which formless, colorless light poured out. And with each shot I took, the streak grew wider, brighter, more aggressive. It was as if I was provoking it, and it was screaming back at me through my own camera. It consumed me. I skipped meals and slept sparingly. I lived on a frantic energy. I filled memory card after memory card with photos that shouldn't exist. It was always there, at the periphery of my vision, a shimmering, vague promise. And I kept shooting, trying to get a clearer shot. Trying to make the blinding white light take on a concrete form. Then my camera died. That day, I was in a moss-covered ravine. The feeling of being watched pressed heavily on the entire right side of my body, as if something was weighing me down. I raised my camera, aimed it at the edge of the frame, and pressed the shutter. The image that appeared on the small LCD screen was a blinding white page, pure white. I shot again. White. I turned the lens down to my feet. White. It had broken the camera. Or rather, it had filled it. My camera could now only see its formless white light. It was useless. A normal person would have stopped here. They would have remembered the ranger's warning and fled the place immediately. But I was no longer normal. Obsession had burned away my reason. Losing my camera was just another increase in difficulty. Now I would have to use my own eyes. I continued to hunt it. I walked through the forest until I felt its familiar presence. Then I stopped, trying to look at it. My head still straight, but my eyes strained to the side, trying to clearly see the shimmering form hanging in the distance, just at the corner of my eye. I tried to keep it in my vision, tried to focus, tried to make it appear clearly. And that's when the blur shifted from the photograph to me. Initially, it was a very small, almost imperceptible speck at the corner of my right eye, a tiny, translucent blur. I assumed it was eye strain, but it didn't disappear. And each time I hunted, each time I forced my eyes to look directly at the creature, the blurry speck grew a little larger, a little cloudier. From a translucent haze, it became a faint white film. That day, I was in the forest, trying to clearly see the shadow hanging from a distant tree. As I strained my eyes, I saw the white speck in my own eye expand, spreading like a drop of milk in water. And at that moment, I understood. Understood with a punch to the chest, so clear it terrified me. The problem wasn't that I shouldn't look at it directly for fun. Its nature was to exist at the edge of perception, and I was trying to pull it into the center, trying to capture it. Sometimes with the camera, sometimes with my eyes. I was violating the fundamental rule that allowed it to exist, and it was retaliating. It was erasing the part of my vision that I used to see it. It was a blind spot, a living, hunting blind spot, and it was growing, consuming my sight. Panic struck, unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was the fear of a person realizing the gun they were cocking was loaded with their own blood. I was deep in the wilderness, and I was going blind. I ran. A clumsy, hurried, panicked escape. I tripped over roots I couldn't clearly see, crashed into branches that appeared out of nowhere. The white film in the corner of my eye pulsed violently with my heartbeat. Finally, I stumbled back to my pickup truck, bruised and scratched, my mind a tangled mess. I sped out of that forest and haven't returned since. That was a month ago. The white film in my vision hasn't disappeared. I've seen 3 ophthalmologists and a neurologist. They ran every test imaginable. They said my eyes were perfectly normal with no physical damage whatsoever. They think I'm experiencing some complex psychological disorder caused by stress and prolonged solitude. I knew it wouldn't be that easy. I thought the connection was the photos. I thought the pictures were anchors. So last week, I built a bonfire in my backyard. I gathered all my memory cards, hard drives, every printed photo I had with that white streak, then burned them all. I sat and watched until they were nothing but melted plastic and gray ash. I felt a cathartic relief. It didn't work. It wasn't just in the forest anymore. It followed me home. It's here with me now as I type these words, not in the room, not in the house. It's in the corner of my eye. I sit on my sofa and I feel that familiar prickling sensation again. And I know if I relax my focus, I'll see it. A tall, inverted, shimmering shape at the edge of my vision. Sometimes it's in the corner of the room. Sometimes, when I'm on the street, it hangs from a utility pole. It's always there. A silent companion that never leaves. The rangers were right. The only rule is to ignore it. And now that is my entire life. I live in a state of continuous, active denial. I cannot turn my head too quickly. I cannot let my eyes wander. I must deliberately, actively avoid looking at the thing that is always there. Because I know if I try to confront it, if I give in to the instinct to look back at what's looking at me, the white patch in my eye will expand and I don't have much vision left. So this is my warning. If one day you find yourself lost in the deep, silent, empty places of the world, and you feel the prickling on your neck, and you see something impossible lurking at the edge of your vision for all that you hold dear, pretend you don't see it. Don't turn back, keep looking straight ahead. There are things not meant for human eyes, and they are willing to take everything from you to ensure you never see them again. Every family has rules. Don't throw wet towels on the floor, no TV before homework is done. In my house, we had all those normal rules. Plus one more, an unspoken rule enforced with chilling coldness. You never ever entered your parents' bedroom. Not remember to knock first. No, the door was always locked. I was never, for any reason, allowed inside. Not to ask a question, not to reach for a toy that had rolled under the door. That room was a fortress. And in my parents' eyes, I was an intruder. And from the moment my memory began, I knew why I wanted to go in there, because of the knocking. It wasn't a continuous sound, it was very faint. A steady asterisk thump, 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 only audible if you stood exactly in the hallway, right in front of their door. It came from inside, from the far wall of the room, the wall shared with the old linen closet in the hallway. I first noticed it around age 6. At first, I thought it was the pipes, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. A child's curiosity is a very difficult thing to overcome. A few times, I caught the door unintentionally unlocked. I'd sneak in, the thick carpet swallowing my footsteps. The room was always dim, the curtains drawn tight. In the air was the faint scent of my mother's lavender perfume and my father's cedar aftershave, just a normal bedroom. A large bed, a wooden dresser, a tall, dark wood wardrobe pressed against the far wall. And as I approached that wardrobe, the sound grew clearer. Thump, thump, thump. It echoed from behind the wardrobe, from inside the wall. Each time I was caught, as if my mother had a sixth sense. I'd barely been inside for a minute when I'd hear her footsteps in the hallway. The look on her face wasn't just anger. It was a primal, deep panic, a fear that made her face tight and unfamiliar, like a stranger's. The punishment was always swift and severe. No TV, no playing outside, grounded for a week. My father was in charge of the lectures. His voice was low, even, colder than a shout. In this house, there are places that belong to your mother and me, and only to your mother and me. You must respect that, or one day you will no longer be able to respect anything. In my teens, I tried a different approach, thinking a direct confrontation might yield results. One evening, I asked directly during dinner, "Why can't I go into your room? And what's that knocking sound I keep hearing?" The entire table fell silent, the clinking of silverware on plates stopped. My father slowly put down his fork, looking at me with eyes as cold and hard as stone. My mother just stared down at her plate, her fingers white from gripping the knife tightly. "There's no knocking," my father said, his voice dangerously low. "And you will stop this. This is the last time we will speak of it. If you mention it again, or if I find you attempting to enter your mother's and my room one more time, the consequences will be something you cannot imagine. Is that clear?" "I understand." I stopped, but I never forgot my mother's behavior afterward, which only deepened the mystery. She was a good mother in her own way, loving but always distant. She worked, she cooked, she cleaned. But whenever she had free time, she was in that room. She would disappear behind the locked door for hours. Sometimes I would press my ear against it just to listen. I never heard the TV or music, just a heavy silence, occasionally broken by her soft humming of a tuneless melody, or her very faint whispers to someone who never whispered back. Now I am 21. I've saved enough money from my part-time job to finally move out on my own to a tiny apartment on the other side of the city. I'm about to leave, and for weeks, only one thought has stuck in my mind: now or never. I cannot leave this house without knowing the truth. That secret has been like a silent third parent in my life, like a ghost present at every family meal, a shadow in every hallway. I have to shine a light on it before I go. I told my father I was ready to move out. He was relieved. That's the only word to describe it. No sadness, just a sense of weary release. Both he and my mother wished me luck, told me they were proud of me. I asked him one last time, my voice trembling slightly, "Dad, before I go, please, can you tell me what's in the room?" His face instantly hardened. The mask of the proud father fell away, revealing the cold, stern guardian of that secret. "Your new life begins when you walk through this door," he said. "What is in this house belongs to your old life. You will leave it all behind. Do you hear me? You will leave it all behind." That was his final answer, and it was also my final motivation. I spent my last night packing my suitcase, my chest empty with a strange feeling. The next morning, I stood by my bedroom window, watching their cars pull out of the garage one by one and drive away. Each went to work in their own car. The house was finally mine. My heart pounded erratically in my chest like a trapped bird. I went down to the kitchen, to the ceramic cookie jar shaped like a grinning pig. That's where they always kept the spare key. I reached in, my fingers brushing against a cold, shiny brass key. Their bedroom key. I stood before the door, my hand trembling as I held the key. It slid into the lock smoothly, making a soft click. I turned it, pushed the door, and stepped inside. The room was exactly as I remembered it, dim still, the scent of lavender and cedar lingering. The large, dark wardrobe stood like a monolith before the far wall, and as I tiptoed closer, I heard it more clearly than ever. Thump, thump, thump. It was steady, slow, weak but certain, the sound of flesh hitting wood. I knelt, pressing my hand against the cold wall right at the edge of the wardrobe. The sound was right there, on the other side. My own breathing sounded ragged in my ears. I didn't understand why I was doing this. Perhaps I just needed to prove to myself once that I wasn't delusional. I spoke to the wall, my voice catching in a whisper. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was so thick I could feel it as a pressure against my eardrums. I waited. Nothing. I was about to stand up, telling myself it was just the house settling, when a sound echoed back through the wall. It was a weak, dry voice, a woman's voice drawn out and thin like a recording playing on a dying battery. It spoke in broken, fragmented syllables. "Kill me." I jumped back as if burned. I recoiled from the wall, my mind refusing to comprehend the meaning of the words. "Kill me asterisk." I must have misheard, it must have said something else. But the voice came again, a little clearer this time, a desperate, scratching plea. "Kill me, please." This was real. Someone was in the wall, someone trapped. My mind immediately plunged into a very dark place. Thinking my parents were monsters, that they had locked someone in the house. I looked at the wardrobe. It wasn't just leaning against the wall, it was clearly intentionally covering something. My entire body surged with adrenaline. I grabbed both sides of the wardrobe and pulled. It was made of solid wood, an old, heavy piece that barely budged. I gritted my teeth, planting my feet, pulling with all my strength, my muscles burning. It began to move, scraping and groaning across the floor, inching its way forward, agonizingly slow. Behind it, where a flat wall should have been, was a door. It was a small, simple wooden door, painted the same color as the wall, clearly designed to blend in. It had a small brass doorknob, no keyhole. It wasn't locked. I could go in. My hand trembled as I touched the doorknob. It was cold. I turned it and pulled. The door opened with a long, damp creak, revealing a dark passage within. I pushed it fully open. The space behind it was very small, no larger than the wardrobe. It was a room, a secret, hidden room. Inside were the fragments of a life I had never known. Tiny dresses hung on a single hook, a dusty mobile, faded pastel animal toys, a stack of photo albums. I picked one up. On the cover, in my mother's handwriting, was just the phrase, "Our angel asterisk." I opened it. There were my parents, younger, happier, their faces radiant with a joy I had never seen on them. And in their arms, they held a baby with dark, wispy hair and eyes exactly like my father's. In the center of that tiny, cramped room was a makeshift altar, a small wooden table covered with a white lace cloth, now yellowed with age. Around it were dozens of candles, some new, some burned down to distorted stumps of wax. And on the altar, resting on a small silk pillow, I saw it. The baby from the photo, but it was no longer a baby. It was a tiny, shriveled, mummified body. Its skin was pale, transparent parchment stretched tightly over its tiny bird-like bones. Its eyes were closed, its mouth open in a tiny black hole on its shrunken face. The sight was horrific, a small corpse preserved and displayed like a relic. I suddenly felt an intense urge to touch it, a pulling force, a need to connect with this impossible tragedy. I extended my trembling hand, very slowly, very gently, and placed my fingertip on its forehead. It was cold and dry. And the world exploded. I saw images, memories, films that weren't mine, all crashing into my head like a tsunami. I saw a sterile, white hospital room, my mother sobbing, her face buried in my father's chest. A somber-faced doctor saying, "We're so sorry. We did everything we could. Your daughter is gone." I saw my parents in this very bedroom, the one I was standing in. They held the small, motionless body of their daughter, wrapped in a hospital blanket. My father, his face rigid with desperate, insane grief, drawing a circle on the floor with red chalk. "We can bring her back," he whispered, his voice like a mad prayer. "The book says we can, if we just keep her, give her a vessel to cling to." I saw them place that tiny body in the center of the circle on the altar. I saw them kneel, chanting incantations in a language that made my teeth ache. I saw the candles flicker, then go out, a cold wave filling the room as the tiny body on the altar twitched just once. And I felt it. Its soul, torn from the piece of oblivion, snatched and thrown back into that decaying little corpse. I felt its confusion, its terror, and its eternal, lingering pain. A conscious, growing, learning mind, trapped in a dead, motionless shell of flesh, unable to move, unable to speak, only able to feel each slow, unending tick of decades and knock, knock, knock on the silent wall of its parents' bedroom. And through it all, I heard its voice, like a soul-shattering scream echoing in my head. "Please kill me." I yanked my hand back, stumbling away, a choked sob escaping my throat. Finally, I understood. My parents weren't monsters, at least not in the way I thought. They were just broken, consumed by a grief so profound that they committed a monstrous act to escape it. They hadn't trapped a stranger, they had trapped their own daughter, my sister. I knew what I had to do, there was no other choice. I took a soft old blanket from the foot of their bed, returned to the secret room, then carefully, almost reverently, wrapped the small, dry corpse. It was as light as a bundle of dried leaves. I placed it in my travel bag on top of my clothes. I took one last look at that sad, horrific room, then turned away. I didn't close the secret door. I didn't push the wardrobe back into place. I wanted them to know. I left the key on the kitchen counter, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The drive passed in a blur. The images, the sensations didn't stop. I felt its gratitude, a wave of pure, beautiful relief, but still mixed with the pain of an impossibly long imprisonment. I felt its pain, its solitude, its horror, and the heavy, crushing pain of my parents. I drove for hours until the city was just a memory, until the road was just a strip of asphalt between fields and junk heaps. I found what I needed, a deserted, abandoned scrapyard. There, amidst mountains of rusty iron, broken metal, and shattered dreams, I built a small bonfire. I opened the blanket, looked at my sister one last time, whispering an apology for our parents, for my own ignorance for her entire stolen life. I placed her on the pyre, poured gasoline, then lit the match. I set her free. I stood and watched the flames consume her body. And when that tiny earthly prison turned to ash, I cried. I cried for the sister I never knew. I cried for my parents, whom I could no longer return to. I cried because the kindest thing I could do was also the cruelest. They would come home. They would see the secret door flung open. They would know what I had done. They would hate me, loathe me for taking away the only thing they had left of her, even if it was just a twisted, blasphemous version of her memory. I had freed my sister, but in return, I would destroy my family, and I don't know how I'm supposed to live with that. Every year, my town had a food drive called Feed Bobby. My hometown was a strange place. We had a video rental store that never had the movie I wanted. a convenience store with a perpetually broken slushy machine, and an annual food drive with a really odd name. Feed Bobby. If you're wondering who Bobby was, you're just like I was at 10 years old. Like every kid in town, and even those who just happened to pass through during the donation program. We used to ask our parents, teachers, basically any adult why it was named that way. But the standard answer was always, Bobby is just a symbolic figure for children whose parents can't afford regular meals. Another answer was that Bobby was actually an acronym, but every time we asked, so what does BBB stand for? They would inevitably make excuses, change the subject, or simply go silent. For a very long time, the most information we got was that at the end of the drive, a few volunteers would transport all the donated food to the recipients. Then, around the same time next year, everything would start again exactly the same. One day, my father came home and told my mother and me that the following Saturday he would be out because he had volunteered to help deliver the donated food to the recipients. I tried to ask him where all that food went and if I could go along. But both questions were met with, "Sorry, son, this is for adults only." I was dying of curiosity, so I hatched a plan. The day my father was preparing to deliver the food, he drove his truck back, the bed loaded with donation boxes. I stealthily climbed into the truck bed, secretly emptied the contents of one box, then quickly slipped inside, curling up and hiding. I knew the chances of being discovered were high, but I didn't care. I desperately wanted to know where all this food went every year. After about an hour, I heard the engine start and felt the truck begin to move. I wanted to peek out, but I knew my father would spot me in the rearview mirror. After about 3 more hours, I felt the truck stop. I heard my father open his door and get out, then a few other volunteers got out of their cars too. I couldn't clearly hear what they were saying then, but I felt someone lift the box I was hiding in. "Damn, is this box full of watermelons and ham or something?" The man grumbled as he carried the box somewhere I couldn't see. It must have been another 45 minutes before he finally put the box down. My heart pounded. Finally, I was about to see where all this food was going. I waited until I heard no more footsteps before crawling out of the box and looking around. It was an enormous cave. I saw what I guessed was the entrance. The entire place was lit by what I assumed were battery-powered lights, with stacks of donation boxes piled everywhere. Looking to the other side, I saw the edge of a chasm. I walked over, leaned down, and looked into it. I didn't know how deep it was, only that the hole was as wide as a football field. My mind raced. What was this food drive for? Why was all this food being brought into this eerie cave? And for the first time in my life, who was Bobby? I felt the ground shake before I heard the sound. Then the entire cave began to vibrate violently. Looking down, I saw something emerging from the darkness, looking like the head of a bright orange beak poking out. From that, a head just slightly smaller than the pit itself slowly revealed itself. Imagine a turtle's head, but covered in sharp spikes, and you'll have a general idea of its shape. It stopped about 4 to 5 meters from the edge of the chasm and began to open its enormous beak. I froze in terror. I didn't know what this thing intended to do. From what I could imagine, it might breathe fire or shoot out a frog-like tongue to snatch me, but it just stood there, as if waiting for something. And then I realized this was Bobby. This thing rose up here. It knew it would be fed because it had been fed like this for who knows how many years. And this was just its head and neck. I couldn't imagine how big the rest of Bobby was. My mix of curiosity and horror was cut short by the sound of footsteps and voices from my father and the other volunteers returning down the pathway. I quickly ran towards the box I had originally hidden in, but realized they would probably start moving that very box. So I circled around to a stack of boxes near the cave entrance and crouched down to hide behind them. My plan was to wait for them to pass, then dash back up and hide in my father's truck bed. The voices and footsteps grew clearer as my father and the others returned. Everything should be over now, another year's rest. I just wish I could poison everything. Nice dream, huh? There isn't enough poison on this entire planet for that thing. Then I heard my father's voice. It was clearly strained. Even if we could, how would we know its carcass wouldn't stink up the whole town? "Wait," I heard him say for the first time, seeing Bobby. Oh my God, I can hear the horror in his voice. I almost wanted to crawl out of my hiding spot, run and hug my dad, tell him I saw it too. He wasn't the only one scared, but I knew that would only make things worse for both of us. Another volunteer ignored my father's fear and calmly said, "Let's start. Just carry the boxes and throw them into its mouth. I watched them one by one carry boxes to the edge of the chasm. When I saw they all had their backs turned, I quietly crept towards the cave entrance, ran back up to the mouth of the cave. From there, I saw my father's truck and climbed back into the truck bed. A few weeks later, I went to the library, trying to find more information about Bobby. I should have guessed that this town would never keep records of a giant turtle monster living beneath it, but what I found was still quite useful. The monster was likely named after the town's founder, Bobby Robertson. And during periods of crop failure, the town was often shaken, even nearly completely destroyed during the Great Depression by a sudden magnitude 3 earthquake. I guess that the townspeople back then decided they needed the food more than Bobby, and it had clearly expressed its displeasure. I don't think my father ever knew I was there with him that night. But after that, I tried to spend more time with him, even though I had to pretend I wasn't obsessed with turtles anymore. The next year, he didn't volunteer for the Feed Bobby campaign again. In fact, he got a promotion, and we had to move to another town because of it. So for the past 22 years, I've been able to let Feed Bobby gradually fade into the past. Until a few days ago, when I suddenly felt nostalgic for my hometown and started looking up what my old town was like now. My hometown no longer exists. At some point in 2005, the entire town collapsed and sank into the earth. The official explanation was that there were many caves beneath the town, and a long overdue mass sinkhole finally occurred. It was hard to find more information about the town before the collapse. But the most important piece of information I found came from a Facebook group about it. I learned that a new group of people replaced the old town council in 2004, and that same year, they voted to end the Feed Bobby food drive. I'm a long-haul truck driver. I stopped for a lost child on a deserted highway late at night. What I saw clinging to it, and the question it asked me, is why I don't drive anymore. This happened a few years ago. Back then, I drove long distances, mostly cross-state trips, the kind of routes that take you through endless stretches of nothing but road and sky. You know the type. The radio crackles with static for hours on end. And the only signs of life left in the world are the occasional pair of headlights flashing past in the opposite direction, miles apart. I was young then, eager to put in the miles to earn money. I didn't see loneliness as a problem, or at least I thought I didn't. That route took me across a long, desolate stretch of highway running along the border of 2 government-controlled territories. I don't want to say exactly where, but imagine vast open space, lots of trees, and nothing else. It was notorious among truckers as a dead zone no cell service, no towns for hundreds of miles in either direction, and often strange weather. Most of the guys tried to get through it during the day, but schedule is schedule. My trip was set to pass through late at night. I still remember the feeling beyond the sweep of my headlights, absolute blackness. The kind of darkness that felt like it was pressing in on the cab. The only sound was the rumble of the diesel engine, occasionally the hiss of the air brakes, and the steady rhythm of the tires tapping on the asphalt. The rhythm was hypnotic, too hypnotic. I'd been driving for about 10 hours, with only one short break in the previous state. Coffee had long since worn off. The dashboard lights were a faint green glow, reassuring in their own way, but at the same time making the darkness outside seem even more absolute. My eyelids felt heavy, as if weighted with lead. You know that feeling, right? You fight it, slap yourself, roll down the window for a blast of cold air, turn up whatever music the radio can still pick up before it dissolves into static. I'd tried all those tricks. It must have been around 2 or 3 a.m. I drifted into a strange, half-asleep, half-awake state, like my brain had shifted into power-saving mode. The white lines on the road started to blur, stretching and distorting, a familiar symptom of fatigue. I remember blinking hard, trying to refocus. That's when I saw it or thought I saw it. Just a flicker at the edge of the headlight beam on the right shoulder, low to the ground. In an instant, I registered a vague, human-like shape. Then it vanished, swallowed by the darkness as my truck sped past. My first thought, deer or coyote, perfectly normal. But it didn't move like an animal, it stood upright. My sluggish brain still tried to process. Too small to be an adult, too still to be an animal startled by an entire semi-truck. Then the rational part, the part still trying to keep me safe on the road, spoke up. You're tired, you're seeing things, it happens, and I almost accepted it. I shook my head, took a swig of the lukewarm water in the bottle beside me, eyes still fixed on the road ahead. but the image stuck in my head, a tiny, upright figure, like a child. No way, I told myself. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? That's ridiculous. Kids don't wander on interstate highways at 3 a.m. Must be a trick of the light, a bush or something. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. I've seen weirder things from exhaustion. Shadows looking like people, trees taking on strange shapes, just part of the job when you keep pushing your limits. I drove for another 30 seconds or so, the image fading. Reason began to win, just imagination. Then I glanced at my side mirror, a habit always checking, and my blood ran cold. Not just cold, but truly like it had turned to thick sludge. There, dimly lit by the red glow of my taillights, receding into the distance, was the reflection of a small figure standing on the shoulder of the road. Exactly where I thought I'd seen something earlier. It wasn't a bush, not a shadow. It was small and definitely standing there, motionless. While my truck continued to pull away, my heart began to pound against my ribs. This wasn't fatigue anymore. This was real. Someone or something was back there, and it looked tiny. Every instinct screamed asterisk danger, something is wrong, just drive. But there was another voice, the part that keeps us human, I guess, whispering something different. A child, alone out here. What if it's hurt? Lost. I battled with myself for a few seconds that stretched into an eternity. The figure in the mirror grew smaller and fainter. If I didn't do something now, it would vanish back into the night. God, just thinking about leaving a child out there, if it really was one, made my stomach clench. Against all reason, against the primal urge to hit the gas and flee, I made my decision. I slowed down, the air brakes hissing like an angry snake, pulling the truck to the shoulder. The chassis groaned in protest. I flickered my hazard lights, their steady blinking cutting through the thick night. Then I did what you're always told never to do with a sealed cargo and a narrow shoulder. I slowly, carefully began to back up. My eyes darting between both mirrors, trying to keep the trailer straight, trying to find that small figure again. The tires crunching on gravel sounded unusually loud. It took a minute, maybe two, but to me, it felt like an hour. The red glow from my taillights finally swept over the area again, and it was still there. A child. I stopped the truck so the cab was roughly parallel to it, about 10 feet away. I turned on my brights, hoping to see more clearly, and also to clearly show I was just a truck, nothing else. The child was small, very small. I guessed about 6 or 7, hard to see clearly in the harsh light. It stood there, right at the edge of the gravel shoulder, where the tree line began. This stretch of road had dense forest right up to it, tall, black pines and thick undergrowth that looked like a solid black wall just beyond the reach of my headlights. The child wasn't looking at me. Its face was turned almost parallel to the road, just walking slowly as if strolling, completely oblivious to the 18-wheeler that had just pulled up beside it, engine rumbling, lights blazing. It wore what looked like pajamas, thin, pale nightclothes in the cold night air. No jacket. I didn't even see any shoes. My brain reeled. Everything was wrong, wrong in so many ways. I turned off the engine. The sudden, almost deafening silence made the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the forest from a breeze I hadn't felt in the cab eerily clear. My heart was still pounding. A strange mix of fear, adrenaline, and a dawning sense of responsibility. I rolled down the window. The night air rushed in, cold and damp, bringing the smell of pine resin and wet earth. "Hey!" I called. My voice sounded hoarse, unusually loud in the stillness. The child didn't react. It just continued, its small, bare feet slowly scuffing on the gravel at a pace that led nowhere. Its head was slightly bowed. I couldn't clearly see its face. "Hey, kid, are you okay?" I called again, louder, slowly, very slowly. The child stopped. It didn't turn its head completely, just slightly, enough for me to see a pale patch of cheek in the headlight beam. Still not looking at the cab, still ignoring the multi-ton steel behemoth idling beside it. A chill ran down my spine. Not the usual goosebumps, but deeper, colder. Wild animals sometimes act strange, but children? A lost child should be scared or relieved or something. This one was nothing. "What are you doing out here all alone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and friendly. The kind you're told to use when talking to a frightened child, though this one clearly wasn't frightened at all. It's the middle of the night. Silence, only the faint scuff of bare feet on gravel as it took another tiny step, then another. As if my presence was just a minor inconvenience, background noise it chose to ignore. This wasn't right. The alarm bells in my head were now ringing furiously. My hand hovered near the gear stick. Part of me wanted to put it in gear, hit the gas, and bolt. but the image of a tiny, solitary child, possibly in shock. I couldn't just leave, could I? "Where are your parents?" I pressed, my voice a little sharper than intended. "Are you lost?" Finally, the child stopped completely. It turned its head a little further, still not looking directly at the cab, but more towards the front of the truck where the headlights were shining straight ahead. Now I could see its face a bit more clearly pale, featureless in the harsh light like a porcelain doll's face. Two small dark streaks, presumably eyes, no expression, nothing at all. No fear, no sadness, no relief, just an empty, blank slate. Then it spoke, a small, thin voice like dry leaves rustling. "Lost," just that one word hung between us. A faint wave of relief washed over me, immediately submerged by a new wave of anxiety. "Okay, lost, I can handle that." "Yes, lost is fine. If you're lost, we can find our way back. Where's your home? Where were you trying to go?" The child finally slowly turned its head towards the cab towards me. I still couldn't see clear details on its face. The angle, the light, something made its face appear blurry despite the direct headlights, but I could feel its gaze. It wasn't a child's gaze, it had a weight and intensity that sent chills down my spine, especially on such a small frame. "Home," it said, its voice still small and thin. "Trying to go home." "Yes, where is your home?" I asked, leaning forward, trying to sound reassuring. "Is it nearby? Did you get lost from a campsite or from a car?" Though I knew there were no campsites for miles around, no broken-down cars on the shoulder, I'd checked clearly. The child didn't answer directly. Instead, it took a small step towards the truck, then another. My hand tensed on the door handle, ready to open it. For what, I wasn't sure, to let it in, to give it temporary shelter. I really didn't know. "It's cold out here," I stated the obvious. "You should get in the truck, it's warmer in here. Then we can drive to where there's cell service and I'll call someone for help." My CB radio was useless, all static. My phone had lost signal an hour ago. The child stopped about 5 feet from the passenger door. Still in those thin pajamas, bare feet on sharp gravel. It should have been shivering, crying. But no, it did neither. "Will you help me?" it asked. Its voice was still small, but something had changed. It was a little less flat, a little more pleading. Expectant, almost. "Yes, of course I'll help you," I replied. That's why I stopped. "Where are your parents? Why are you out here?" The child tilted its head, an unnatural, jerky movement. "They're waiting at home." Where's home? Which way?" I gestured vaguely along the empty highway. The child didn't point towards the road. It gave a slight nod, a movement so subtle it was almost accidental, towards the forest, towards the thick, dark embrace of the dense trees lining the highway. "In there," it said, my stomach clenched. "In the forest. My home is in the forest. Lost," it repeated, as if that explained everything. "Trying to find my way. It's too dark." "Yes, dark," I forced a smile, my eyes scanning the tree line, which looked like a solid black wall, no sign of trails or houses, just ancient, dense forest, the kind of place you could get lost for days, even in daylight. "Can you come out?" the child asked. "Help me find it. It's not far, I can't see clearly from here." Every rational thought in my head screamed in unison. Do not get out of the truck in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, with a strange child who wants to pull you into the forest. No, absolutely not. But it looked so small, so vulnerable. If there was even a small chance it was telling the truth, that its home was just a little ways away, and it really was lost. "Kid, I don't think that's a good idea," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle. "It's dangerous for both of us to go in there at night. The best way is for you to get in the truck with me. We'll drive to where there's signal, and I'll call the police or the rangers. They'll be able to find your home better." The child just stood there, its unreadable face looking directly at me. "But home is right there," it insisted, its voice a little urgent. "Just a little way. I can almost see it. If you just step down, the light from the car door will help." My skin crawled with goosebumps. Something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. The way it was trying to coax me out. Its complete lack of normal emotional reaction. The pajamas, bare feet, the forest. I narrowed my eyes, trying to look closer at the child, trying to pierce through the strange, blurry film on its features. The headlights were bright enough to illuminate an entire deer, but the light seemed to be absorbed by it rather than reflected. Its eyes, I still couldn't make them out, just two dark hollows. "I really think you should get in the truck," I said, my voice firmer. "It's warm in here, we can sit calmly and figure things out." The child took another step. Now it was almost touching the cab's running board. "Please," that small voice again. My feet hurt, I can't walk much further. If you just help me a little, just to the trail. The war in my head erupted. The instincts of a long-haul truck driver. Years of seeing strange things and hearing even stranger stories at truck stops were blaring alarms. But the human part, the part that saw a seemingly suffering child, was still there, arguing back. I was utterly exhausted. Perhaps my mind wasn't clear. Perhaps it was all just some bizarre misunderstanding. I narrowed my eyes, trying to look past the child towards the tree line it pointed to. Was there a path I'd missed? A flickering light deep in the forest? No, nothing. Just thick, solid blackness that yielded no quarter. And then I saw it. Not clearly at first, more like something anomalous. A ripple in the darkness behind the child. It stood almost completely with its back to the forest, its face towards my truck. Behind it, the darkness of the forest should have been absolute, but there was something connected to it. Something that extended from its lower back, beneath the thin pajama top, then disappeared into the deeper shadows among the trees. At first, I thought it was an optical illusion, a strange shadow cast by my headlights at an awkward angle. Or a rope pulling its shirt, snagged on a branch. I leaned forward, trying to see more clearly. The child was still speaking, its voice a persistent whisper. "It's not far, please help me, I'm cold." But I was barely hearing those words anymore. I was only focused on what was behind it. It wasn't a rope, not a shadow. It was a long, thick, black tube. It seemed to grow directly from the child's lower back, impossibly smooth, disgustingly seamless. Its surface was black and indistinct, like a patch of night pulled into a solid form, and it stretched away from the child's body for about 3 or 4 meters before disappearing into the dense blackness between 2 large pines. It wasn't rigid. It had a certain softness, a very slight, almost imperceptible vibration, like a gigantic umbilical cord made of solidified darkness. It reflected no light from the headlights, it simply swallowed it. My breath caught in my throat. My blood, already cold, now felt frozen solid. This wasn't just wrong anymore, this was impossible. Unnatural. The child was still pleading, "You'll help me, won't you? It's right there, you're almost there." When I finally found my voice, it was just a whisper. My eyes couldn't leave that proboscis. "Kid, what is that, behind you?" The child flinched, not much, just a slight tension in its small body. Its head, which had been tilted pleadingly, suddenly straightened, and the emptiness on its face intensified. "What?" it asked. Its voice suddenly lost all trace of pleading, returning to a flat, colder tone. That thing," I stammered, pointing with a trembling finger. "That thing growing from your back, leading into the forest. What is that?" The child didn't turn to look. It didn't need to. Its gaze, or rather the black hollows where its eyes should have been, bored into me. "There's nothing there," it said, its voice still small but with a new edge, a hardness. "You're seeing things, you're tired." It was using my own earlier excuse against me. "No," I said, my voice beginning to acquire a trembling certainty born of pure terror. "No, I'm not that tired. I see it clearly. It's right there, it's attached to you." The child was silent for a long moment. The only sound was my own heart pounding, so loud I was sure it could hear it. The crickets went silent, the wind seemed to stop, an abnormal stillness settled. Then the child's face began to change. Not a sudden, dramatic transformation like in movies, but much more subtle and therefore far more terrifying. The emptiness didn't vanish, but it sharpened. Its pale skin seemed stretched tight over its bones. The areas around its eyes, those 2 dark streaks, grew deeper, blacker, sharper, and for an instant, something ancient, distant to the very core, flickered across its face. Not human anger. It was something older, colder, and infinitely patient, now being pushed to its limit. The air in the cab suddenly thickened, making it hard to breathe. "Just get out of the truck," the child said. And its voice, oh God, its voice was no longer the thin, small voice of a child. It was deeper, resonant, accompanied by a strange, grinding hum like stones rubbing together. It came from that tiny body, yet it was impossibly vast, ancient, and deep. I felt it vibrate in my chest. "Get out, now!" The command was absolute. My hand, which had been hovering near the gear stick, now gripped it like a lifeline. My other hand fumbled for the key, still in the ignition, which I should have taken out earlier. "What are you?" I gasped, staring at the monstrosity playing dress-up as a child. The solid black tube pulsed, connecting it to the shadows of the forest. The child's head tilted again, an unnatural, jerky movement. The expression, if it could be called an expression on its face, was one of pure contempt, disgust. as if I were a stupid insect it couldn't quite crush. And then it spoke, still in that low, grinding, rasping voice. The next words carved themselves into my brain, colder than any winter night. "Why?" it rasped, the sound like scratching inside my skull. "Are humans so smart now, god damn it?" That was all, just that one sentence. The cosmic frustration in its tone, the implication of previous encounters, easier prey. Its absolute alienness. I didn't think, didn't calculate. I reacted, a primal fear that bypassed all higher thought, seizing control. My hand twisted the key, the diesel engine roared back to life, exploding in the horrifying stillness. The child that thing asterisk actually took a step back, a small, jerky step, that ancient, tense expression on its face tightening even more. I slammed the gear stick into drive, my foot pressed hard on the gas pedal, the truck lurched forward. The wheels spun uselessly on the gravel for a terrifying instant before catching on the asphalt. I didn't look at it. I didn't dare. My eyes were glued to the road ahead, knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. The entire cab vibrated. The truck roared off, accelerating frustratingly slowly. In that moment of horror, I imagined that tube suddenly lashing out, hooking onto my trailer, pulling me backward, dragging me into the forest. I imagined that tiny figure with its ancient voice somehow running at the same speed as the truck. I risked a glance in the passenger side mirror. It was still standing there on the shoulder, motionless. My truck's speeding lights cast its shadow long and sharp, and behind it the black tube was still clearly visible, a grotesque umbilical cord crawling back into the deep forest. It didn't coil, didn't retract, it just stayed there. That thing didn't chase me, it just stood and watched me go. And somehow that was even more terrifying. The absolute confidence, the patience, as if it knew there would be others, or maybe it was just annoyed by this failed attempt. I just drove. I don't know for how long, just drove. My foot felt glued to the gas pedal, the engine roaring. I watched the speedometer climb steadily, far exceeding any safe or legal limit for a semi-truck of this size on such a pitch-black road. I ignored the image of that thing, the child's body with the shadow umbilical cord stretching into the forest, and that voice, that brain-crushing voice with the question etched onto the inside of my eyelids. I must have driven for over an hour, maybe more, at a speed that should have been enough to kill me or get me caught. Before the adrenaline began to recede, giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion I had never known. My hands trembled so violently it was hard to keep the steering wheel straight. Tears streamed down my face, not from sadness, but from absolute horror mixed with relief that I was still alive. When the eastern sky began to turn gray, signaling dawn, and my phone finally beeped, showing a single bar of signal, I pulled into the first wide-open spot I found. I practically rolled out of the cab, doubling over and vomiting onto the gravel until there was nothing left but dry heaves. I sat there on the cold ground, trembling uncontrollably for a very long time, watching the sun rise, trying to convince myself it was just a dream, a hallucination from exhaustion. But I knew it wasn't. The details of that tube, the voice, the question you don't hallucinate something so specific, coherent, and utterly alien. I never reported it. Who would I report it to? What would I say? "Officer, I saw a child, but it was actually an ancient, unimaginable horror tethered to the forest by an umbilical cord of shadow, and it got angry because I wouldn't make it dinner." They would lock me up, give me a breathalyzer, drug tests, send me to a psychiatrist. I finished that trip on autopilot, delivered the cargo, drove the empty truck back to the yard, and I quit. I told them I was burnt out, needed a break. They tried to keep me, offering different routes, higher pay. I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that child, that tube, that forest. Every dark road became a trap. I found work closer to home, the kind of job that kept me home at night. I don't drive into remote areas if I can avoid it. Especially not at night. I still have nightmares. Sometimes I'm too tired, driving home late, and I see a blurry flicker at the edge of my vision on the roadside, and my heart threatens to burst from my chest again. I don't know what that thing was. Alien, demon, or something else, something that doesn't fit into any of our categories. I only know one thing. It's still out there, it's patient, and it seems to have learned that the old tricks don't work as well as they used to. Why are humans so smart now, god damn it? That sentence haunts me. It implies that we weren't like that before. It suggests there was a time, perhaps just perhaps, when tired, lonely people like me on dark roads at night would simply step out of their cabs when called, and then never return. So, if one day you're driving through one of those long, desolate, graveyard-quiet stretches of highway late at night, and you see something inexplicable, perhaps just keep driving. Perhaps being smarter now means knowing when not to stop. Knowing when to ignore that small voice in your head telling you to help. Because what's asking for help might not be what you think. Stay safe out there, and please, for your own sake, stick to the well-lit roads. After my eye surgery, I couldn't bear to look at my family anymore. I'm typing these words on my laptop, squeezed into a closet. The closet door is blocked by a desk and dresser. I hear them outside the bedroom door, their voices still calm, gentle, full of love, but there are other sounds too. And it's those sounds that keep me in here. It all started 3 months ago. My entire life had literally been a blur. I was born with severe astigmatism, so bad that my ophthalmologist used to joke that I always saw the world through a blurry filter. Without my glasses, I couldn't even reach for them on my bedside table. I'd have to grope around blindly. Wearing contact lenses was daily torture. I was 24, had a stable job, and had finally saved enough money. LASIK was my ticket to a new life, a clear life. The consultation was as sterile and reassuring as advertised. The doctor was an older, sharp man with an intense, almost predatory focus. He had a way of looking into people's eyes that made me feel like he was seeing deeper than the normal eyeball. He spoke of refractive errors, corneal flaps, his voice calm and authoritative, like flowing water washing away all my remaining anxieties. He mentioned a new, somewhat experimental technique he was pioneering. He said it was more precise, yielding an unprecedented level of clarity. He claimed it could correct both atmospheric distortions and light intensity fluctuations that standard methods couldn't handle. I was immediately convinced. I wanted the best. I wanted to see everything. God, I was such a fool. The surgery itself was as weird and impersonal as one might imagine. The smell of antiseptic, the cold metal of the head restraint, the Valium they gave me made my limbs heavy, no longer feeling like my own. I remember the sensation of pressure on my eyeball, the smell of burning they said was just the laser, and the doctor's calm voice narrating each step. Perfect corneal flap. Now we're reshaping. Just a few more seconds. Then the next blackness, the layers of bandage and eye shield gently taped over my eyes. Recovery was the hardest part. 2 weeks plunged into complete darkness. I had to rely on my family, my mother, my father, my sister. They were wonderful. They led me around the house, holding my hand so I wouldn't bump into furniture. Mom cooked all my favorite dishes. The smell of stew, roasted chicken filled the house. She sat beside me, spoon-feeding me so I wouldn't spill. Her voice was a gentle, constant sound in the black hole that had swallowed my world. Eat a little more, darling. You must eat to get strong. My father read to me for hours. Sports news, fantasy stories, anything to pass the time. His deep, resonant voice was my only anchor in the darkness. My sister changed the music, played podcasts, then just sat there with me. No need to talk. Her presence alone was enough to comfort me. They were a perfect, loving family, and I was filled with gratitude. I counted the days until I could see them again, truly see them with my new, perfect eyes. The day the bandages came off should have been a celebration. The whole family drove me to the clinic. The nurse gently cut the tape, slowly removing the gauze wrapped around my eyes. There was a moment when the bandages were off, but my eyes were still closed, and I trembled with pure excitement. All right, she said softly. Now open them slowly. The light will be very bright at first. I followed her instructions. I squeezed my eyes shut, then slowly opened them a crack. The first thing I noticed was the intensity of the sharpness. It was violent. Every single surface in the room seemed to leap into my eyes, the tiny perforations in the acoustic ceiling tiles, the minuscule fibers on the nurse's blue scrubs, the nearly invisible hairline cracks in the vinyl floor tiles. It all rushed in like a tsunami of visual information, making my brain ache. The doctor said I'd be hypersensitive at first, and it would gradually subside. I blinked, trying to focus. The nurse was smiling at me. She looked normal. A woman in her 40s, kind eyes, a slightly tired smile. Then I turned to look at my family, and my world shattered. It's very difficult to describe what I saw, because for the first few seconds, my brain simply refused to accept it. It was like a cognitive blind spot, a display error. My mother was smiling, her lips moving, calling my name, but her face was no longer just her face. Clinging to her jawline, wrapped up her left cheek, was something else. It was a pulsating mass of grayish-pink flesh, crisscrossed with pale purple veins. Two slender, whip-like tendrils, no thicker than worms, wrapped around my mother's lower lip. And when she spoke, they twitched and adjusted as if pulling her lips into the precise shape of a smile. My mother's skin was stretched paper-thin where it met that growth. I darted my eyes away, my heart pounding as if it wanted to burst from my chest, then looked at my father. He was patting my shoulder, his face radiant with pride, but from his chest, protruding from within his button-up shirt, was a larger, more complex structure. It was a mushroom-like mass of flesh that seemed to have burrowed deep into his sternum, its surface ridged like a repulsive seashell, shimmering with a thin layer of viscous fluid. From it, a thick, tentacle-like tube wriggled up, disappearing under his chin, entering his mouth. My father wasn't speaking at all. The voice emanating from him, but it was that fleshy tube that vibrated with each word. Nausea surged in my throat. I looked at my sister. She was the worst sight. Something thin, almost translucent, covered her head and shoulders like a living shawl. It had no face, no eyes, no nose, only a series of pulsating sacs running down its spine, beating in a slow rhythm. Its tendrils intertwined thickly with her hair, and two larger, thicker ones were embedded directly into the corners of her mouth, pulling her lips into a perpetually gentle smile. "How do you feel?" My mother's voice was soft and tender, but the thing clinging to her cheek pulsed rhythmically with each word. "Can you see us clearly now?" I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. I just stared, letting my new, perfectly cursed eyes take in every horrific detail. The way those things moved in sync with their hosts, how the human body itself seemed secondary. "He's just in shock," my father's resonant voice boomed, the fleshy tube on his chest vibrating. Too much to take in at once. I must have fainted, or at least lost consciousness, because the next thing I remember, I was in the car, on the way home, my forehead resting against the cool window. I kept my eyes tightly shut. I told them the light was too bright, my head was splitting. They were very understanding, they completely believed me. The next few weeks were a living nightmare. I pretended my eyes were still adjusting, that I had constant headaches. I tried to stay in my room in the dark as long as possible, but I couldn't hide forever. I still had to eat. The first time my mother brought in a tray of food, I almost screamed. It was her famous beef stew, a dish I had loved since childhood. The scent was the same, rich, savory, with a hint of rosemary. But what I saw on the plate wasn't stew. It was a bowl of dark red, almost black, viscous sludge. It moved. It pulsed up and down in a very slow rhythm like a living organ. Mixed in the thick porridge were small, pale white, wriggling creatures like maggots. "Eat, darling," my mother said, her voice still warm while the parasite on her cheek quivered with excitement. "You must eat to get strong." I looked at the bowl, then at her. I saw a tendril on her face extend down into the bowl, scoop up a piece of the twitching sludge, then put it into its own mouth. My mother chewed and swallowed, then smiled at me. I rushed to the bathroom and vomited for almost 20 minutes. I learned to cope. I took the food tray back to my room, then dumped everything into the toilet and flushed. Afterward, I pretended I had eaten it all. I lived on protein bars and bottled water secretly hidden in my room, but even the water wasn't normal. When they poured me a glass of tap water, what I saw wasn't clear at all. It was a viscous, slightly reddish liquid, like diluted blood, yet they drank it without a second thought. They poured it out, and before drinking, the things clinging to them would dip small, barbed tendrils into the glass, swirl it around, then let the host drink. The most terrifying thing was that everything else was still perfectly normal. Sometimes I'd sneak out of the house. I'd walk down the street, and everyone looked normal. The mailman, the children playing in the park, the woman jogging with her dog, they were all just people. Only my family was different. Or was I going insane? Was this some rare post-operative hallucination, or a brain tumor? I started watching them very closely. I realized that when they thought I wasn't looking, their movements became less human. My father would sit on the armchair, and the mushroom-like thing on his chest would occasionally gape open, revealing a black hole inside from which low, guttural clicking sounds emanated. My sister would sometimes stand motionless for hours, staring at a wall while the translucent creature on her back rippled and waved as if communicating with something invisible to me. Then I realized my family never actually chewed. Their jaws moved, but it was the tendrils on the creatures that did the work, shoveling the living, squirming porridge into their mouths where it was absorbed, not swallowed. The isolation crushed me. I was afraid of my own family. Their affectionate touches were nothing more than alien probing tendrils. Their gentle words were a horrifying imitation. I had to go back to the doctor. He had to know what was happening. He had done this to me, he had to fix it. I scheduled a follow-up post-operative appointment. My mother offered to drive me. I made up a story about wanting to take the bus to feel independent again. The look she gave me wasn't a mother's look. Her eyes were still gentle, but the thing clinging to her cheek pulsed in a slow rhythm, like a suspicious wink. The hospital was like a beacon of normalcy in a desert of madness. The receptionist, the patients in the waiting room, other doctors, they were all human, without fleshy attachments. I felt a surge of relief so strong I almost burst into tears. I wasn't crazy. The world was still normal, except for something fundamentally wrong inside my own home. At the ophthalmology department, I asked, "I'd like to see the doctor who performed my surgery." The receptionist, a bored-looking young woman, typed on her keyboard for a moment. "I'm sorry, sir," she said without looking up. "That doctor no longer works here." My blood ran cold. What? What do you mean? I just saw him a few weeks ago." "He resigned," she replied, this time looking up at me with a hint of annoyance. "Submitted his resignation suddenly, indefinite leave. We were told he went abroad." "Abroad where? Is there any way to contact him? This is urgent." My voice was rising, trembling with panic. "Sir, I don't have that information. If you're having problems with your eyes, we can schedule you with another doctor." "Problems?" It sounded like she was talking about a pimple. I backed away from the counter, my head reeling. He had vanished. The only thread connecting me to what had happened, my only hope for an escape, was severed. I was left alone with this. I was about to leave, dejected, when an elderly nurse arranging brochures on a nearby rack caught my eye. She gave a subtle nod towards a small hallway to the side, a nod so quick it was almost subconscious. I hesitated a moment, then followed. She slipped into an empty examination room, holding the door open for me. "You're one of his patients," she whispered, a statement, not a question. In her eyes was a strange mix of pity and fear. "The super clarity cases." I just nodded, unable to speak. "He left in a hurry," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Packed up his office overnight, said he was going to a remote place. He was always an odd one, brilliant but strange, always talking about filters, veils." She glanced out at the empty hallway. "He left this for me, said if anyone came back, anyone who saw things differently, to give it to them." She pressed a small, folded piece of paper into my hand. It was a phone number, just 10 digits, hastily written. "I don't know what it is," she said, already backing towards the door. "And please don't say you got it from me. Good luck." She was gone before I could even thank her. I ran out of the hospital, not stopping until I found a public payphone a few blocks away. My hands were trembling so much I could barely dial the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when I heard a voice on the other end. It was him. His voice sounded strained, distorted like a bad signal, but unmistakable. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice sharp and suspicious. "It's me," I stammered, not even giving my name. "LASIK, a few weeks ago, the new method." There was a long silence on the other end. I heard wind and something else, a very faint, steady clicking sound. "Ah," he finally said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "So it worked. I wasn't sure. The clarity you're seeing, it's them, isn't it?" "Seeing what?" I almost screamed into the phone. "What have you done to me? My family, they have things on them. Monsters." "Not monsters," he corrected, his voice tinged with a frightening academic fascination. "Passengers, symbiotic organisms. They've been with us for millennia, woven into our very fabric. We are merely their livestock." I leaned heavily against the glass pane of the phone booth, my legs feeling like they would buckle. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." "The human eye is a marvel," he began, slipping back into his lecturing tone, like in the sterile clinic. "But it is not perfect. It evolved not just to see, but also not to see. From the moment we are born, a biological filter is active, a complex chain of photoreceptor cells and neural inhibitory mechanisms that render them invisible to us. That is the veil, a defensive mechanism developed over thousands of years to protect us. If we were to see them, we would resist. Their existence depends on our ignorance." My brain struggled to keep up, to comprehend the madness he was spewing. Who are they?" "I don't know their true name in their language," he replied, a hint of helplessness in his voice. "Parasites is the closest description, but still not quite right. The bond is deeper than that. They nourish us, they protect us from certain diseases. They keep the host calm, content. In return, they live, they experience the world through us." "And the food," I whispered. The image of the squirming porridge flashed in my mind. Water is their sustenance, not ours, he confirmed. An organic biomass and their own larval eggs which they cultivate. They process it and transmit filtered nutrients to the human host. A perfect closed system, as long as your eyes cannot see it. The pieces crashed together, forming a picture so horrifying I felt my sanity tearing apart. You did this on purpose, the surgery. It was a hypothesis, he rasped, his voice suddenly rising to a frantic pitch. My entire life I've studied the eye, its limitations. I saw abnormalities, inexplicable patterns. I believed we were not alone, that the truth was right before our eyes, merely filtered away. I thought I could bypass that filter, surgically remove the veil. But the challenge, the real challenge, was finding people who had them, because it seems not all humans carry them. I suspected myself for a long time, but you are the proof. You have to make it go back, I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. I can't live like this. Please, you have to fix me. The line went silent again, only the wind and that clicking sound. When he spoke, his voice was filled with a terrible resignation. I can't, he said softly. I don't know how. I only learned how to open the door. I never found a way to close it. That's why I ran. They know about me. The ones not attached to hosts, the free ones. They can sense me, and now they will sense you too. He paused. Listen very carefully. The ones attached to your family, they are slowly realizing you can see them. Their primary directive is to protect their host, to keep the secret. They will see you as a glitch, and they will try to fix you. Do not let them touch you. Do not eat or drink anything they offer. And for God's sake, do not let them get near your eyes. The line went dead. I stood there for a very long time, the silent receiver pressed to my ear. Fix me. The word repeated itself in the hollow space where hope had just been dug out. When I arrived home, the atmosphere had changed. The facade of normalcy was gone. They were all sitting in the living room, waiting for me, mother, father, sister. All three turned to look at me as I walked in, their movements eerily coordinated. Their faces wore expressions of gentle concern, but the passengers were agitated. The mass of flesh on my mother's cheek pulsed continuously. The mushroom-like growth on my father's chest spread wide, the black hole in the center slightly agape. The translucent parasite on my sister's back rippled like water, its color gradually changing from clear to milky white. You were gone so long, my mother said, her voice still sweet as honey. I was worried. I just wanted to get some air, I replied, my voice trembling. I started backing away towards the stairs. Your eyes look tired, Father growled, standing up. The tube on his chest pulsed. You're not adapting well. The doctor called earlier, said he forgot to give you this. He held up a small, clear plastic bottle with a dropper cap. Eye drops. He said the doctor's name, the very man who should now be in another country. Mother stepped forward, taking the bottle from Father's hand. He said this is a special, stronger kind of medicine. It will help your eyes be less sensitive, make everything easier to see. She twisted the cap, and that's when I saw the cloudy white substance in the bottle wasn't medicine. I clearly saw a small, viscous blob of the same color oozing from a tiny hole on the parasite clinging to her cheek, dripping down. My mother was trying to make me drop a part of it into my eyes to blind me again. No, I whispered, backing up the stairs. No, don't come near me. Their smiles never wavered, but their eyes became cold and empty. Don't be stubborn, darling, Father said, stepping onto the stairs, mother and sister following closely. We only want to help you. We love you, brother, my sister added, her voice flat. The parasite draped over her head rippled, and two new, smaller tendrils sprouted near her temples, their tips razor-sharp. I turned and bolted into my room, slamming the door shut and locking it just as they reached the top of the stairs. I heard a hand twisting the doorknob, then a soft, polite knock. Darling, open the door, Mother's voice rang out. I frantically pushed my desk, dresser, anything heavy against the door. The wood groaned. They tried for almost an hour, their voices unchanging, still smooth as butter. They coaxed me to come out and eat, saying there was a special, nutritious stew good for my eyes. I imagined the wriggling larvae inside, specially designed to enter my gut and reseal the old veil from within. I refused. Then the knocking stopped. For a while, there was no sound. I prayed they had given up. But then new sounds began. From beneath the floor and through the door, I heard the wet, heavy press of my father's body against the door. But it wasn't the sound of human flesh. It was the hard, fungal shell on his chest scraping against the wood, and a clicking sound, a continuous chattering sequence of clicks. It was their true voice. The parasites were talking to each other, wet, sharp clicks interwoven with low, guttural croaks. I could even hear their hunger. Mother started speaking again, her voice still sweet, filled with concern. "Darling, come out, we only want to make you feel better. We just want to help you see things correctly again." But as she spoke, I heard it clearly, right on the other side of the thin wood, the frantic, eager clicking of the thing wearing her face. They were behind the door, sitting there, waiting. They knew I would have to come out sooner or later. My water was almost gone, and I was thirsty. I was so thirsty my throat was raw and burning, but I wouldn't drink their blood-red water. I wouldn't eat their squirming food, and I wouldn't let them drop their filth into my new, cruelly clear eyes. Now I could see everything, and it was hell. Check rear seat asterisk. The first time that message appeared, I didn't pay much attention. I figured it was a new kind of warning they put in cars now, to remind owners not to forget kids in hot cars or something like that. It had never appeared to me before, but I thought maybe a passenger had left a bag or something on the floor, triggering a weight sensor. But there was nothing in the back seat. I leaned down, looked under the seats, shining my light into every corner, even running my hand along the seat edges to see if a wallet or phone was wedged in a crevice. I didn't think such small things could trigger a warning, but the car was fairly new. I wasn't sure. Anyway, there was absolutely nothing there. Honestly, by the end of the next day, I'd forgotten all about it. Yet when I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, the message reappeared on the dashboard. I turned around to check the back seat again, still empty. No passenger had texted about a lost item. Was this a default car feature? A general warning, reminding the driver to check the back seat every time they turned off the engine? If so, it felt a bit counterproductive. A warning that appears every time like that will inevitably be ignored eventually. It would become part of the background. And I was certain the car hadn't done this during the first few months I owned it. Instead, this felt like the kind of change pushed through software updates. Maybe a new law or a lobbying group mandated that cars keep this warning active, like those meaningless parental advisory labels on old music albums. That night, I went online, scouring car forums and articles to see if anyone else mentioned this warning. I found nothing about it appearing every time the engine was turned off. In fact, it seemed no one else was seeing it constantly. This issue was only happening with my car, clearly a faulty sensor. The car was probably still under warranty, but to fix it, I'd have to leave it at the dealership for a day, and the warranty wouldn't cover my lost wages. I told myself I could ignore it. It was just a tiny message, and I'd get used to it, overlook it unconsciously. I was wrong. Every time I turned off the engine, that message seared itself into my eyes like a persistent itch. I started developing an obsessive habit of checking the back seat every time I got out of the car, even though I knew for sure there would be nothing there. I vacuumed every corner until not a single crumb remained. I checked the seatbelt latches. Everything was perfect, yet the warning still appeared. I tried to ignore it. I deliberately glanced elsewhere whenever I turned off the engine, but I could still feel it glowing subtly on the dark dashboard, seeing those words imprinted on the inside of my eyelids. I would get out of the car without looking back. I convinced myself it was a waste of time because there was nothing to find. I knew I was right, of course. Yet, at 3 a.m., I would still stare at the ceiling, one question echoing in my mind: what if? Finally, I dragged myself outside, knelt in the gutter, still in my pajamas, holding my phone with the flashlight on, shining it under the seats, searching for something I knew didn't exist. The back seat was empty, as always. That warning haunted me day and night. I only saw it when I stopped the car, but I knew it was always waiting. I started checking the rearview mirror dangerously often, my eyes constantly glued to the unnecessary back seat. Passengers noticed. My ratings dropped, and the comments mentioned concerns about my driving focus. My tips evaporated. Finally, I gritted my teeth and took the car to the dealership to fix the sensor. The warning message seemed to mock me as I parked the car in the lot, daring me to go inside without looking back. I wanted to. I knew for sure there was nothing there. But if I told them the sensor was faulty and they went to check and found a bag, a box, or anything sitting prominently on the back seat, I'd look like an idiot for not having checked myself. I knew I had checked 1,000 times, but I still turned to look one more time, just to be sure. I explained the problem to the service advisor at the front desk. He typed a few lines into his computer, then said, "It'll probably be a few hours before we can look at it." "That's fine," I said. "I can wait." "Are you sure there's nothing?" he began. I cut him off more sharply than intended. "There's nothing in the back seat. I've looked." All right, he raised his hands as if to calm me. "I just wanted to save you some time, just in case." After that, I turned around to look again. If I was wrong after all this, I'd want to disappear into the earth. Still empty, always empty. By now, I knew every crevice of that back seat. There was nothing there. I sat in the waiting room, drinking coffee, scrolling on my phone. Absurdly, I felt incredibly uneasy. And I didn't know why. It was just a faulty sensor. They'd find it and fix it, and the problem would disappear. It was ridiculous that I had waited until now, letting it torment me for so long. Finally, they called me up to the counter. "We couldn't find any problem with your car," the mechanic said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "The back seat is completely empty. I was absolutely sure of that." "Yes, the back seat is spotless," he nodded. "But we also couldn't get that warning to come on unless someone is sitting in the back seat. When there's someone in the back seat, it displays as designed, but if it's just the driver, it doesn't." My face must have been somewhere between shock and fury. The mechanic took a step back. "All right, let me show you clearly." I tried to compose myself and followed him to the garage. He started the car while I stood outside, watching through the window. He let the car run for a while, then turned off the engine. No message appeared. "See," he said. "If you want, we can still replace the part, but since we didn't find a fault, the warranty won't cover it. And to replace it, we'd have to remove the entire back seat, so the labor costs would be quite high." I ignored him, climbing into the driver's seat. I started the engine, then in a state of half eagerness, half dread, turned it off. For the first time in weeks, no warning appeared. A wave of relief washed over me, like a huge rock had been lifted from my chest. I turned the engine on and off a few more times, still no message. The warning was gone. "So, satisfied?" the mechanic smiled. "I can't believe how relieved I feel," I replied. He shrugged. "Wish all cars were that easy." On the drive home, I felt like I was flying. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been or how much the car had begun to feel like a prison. The road ahead was wide open, the day was strangely beautiful. I felt free. In the corner of my eye, a flickering light. On the passenger side, an orange light went out, something I had never paid attention to before. This time, I stared at it, trying to remember what message it had displayed earlier. It flashed very quickly again, just enough for me to read, "Passenger airbag off." It illuminates when there's no one in the front passenger seat. Now the light was off. That last flicker could have been anything. A faulty LED, a malfunctioning sensor, one of 1,000 trivial electrical glitches in the world. Or it could be something that had just settled into the passenger seat. I immediately pulled to the side of the road. I left the engine running. I opened the door, got out, and walked straight. I didn't look back. No need, I knew there was nothing in the back seat now. I never went back for the car. A few days later, the police called. They said they had found my car. Some kids had stolen it and driven recklessly. The car was totaled. So were the kids. They were reviewing the dashcam footage and asked if I needed a copy for insurance. I shouldn't have watched it. From the moment I plugged the USB into my computer, I knew I shouldn't watch it. But I had to know. At first, they were laughing and shouting wildly as they sped out of town. Everyone was clearly having a blast. But soon after, one of them started panicking, telling the driver to slow down. From there, the panic escalated. Screaming and yelling, one shouted the brakes weren't working, another cried that the steering wheel wouldn't turn, the doors wouldn't open. Meanwhile, the speedometer needle slowly climbed, higher and higher. Finally, the footage ended. As you might guess, I'm sure there will be tons of questions like why I abandoned the car and left the keys in it. Did I know the car had any problems? I suppose the report from the dealership stating no faults in the car, which I received that day, will be quite useful to prove my innocence. But right now, I don't care about any of that. The doorbell app on my phone chimed, indicating someone was at my front porch, but on the camera screen, there was no one there.